Our story begins in the quiet town of Ebelstein, a medieval town somewhere in the mountains. There lived a rather strange old man, whom the locals called the Old Liar. The people of this poor land considered him a failure, capable of using only one-star magic. However, the old man constantly boasted that he was a great magician, and he always lost his temper if the children tried to make fun of him. Meanwhile, a white-haired boy was nearby, watching all this commotion. Soon he became the old man's apprentice. The boy did not have the noble dream of becoming a hero through magic. The old man simply needed someone to look after him and feed his pride. At the same time, the white-haired youth merely took advantage of the chance to gain new knowledge. Time passed so unnoticed, the seasons changed. Spring soon came to the town of Ebelstein. One day, in the middle of a forest clearing, the mentor watched as his student trained, concentrating his internal energy. The boy struggled to control the power emanating from his own body. To the old man's surprise, he had already learned to sense and control the flow of mana. The young mage then focused on the target, his eyes filled with determination. After this, he stretched out his hand with great effort. The next moment, a powerful blue arrow of energy shot towards the forest. The spell flew forward quickly and accurately hit the tree trunk. Completely exhausted, the boy collapsed onto the grass, and the mentor just silently watched all of this. So the boy spent a whole year next to this old man. By carrying out endless difficult tasks, the young man eventually managed to become a one-star mage. Later, a quiet night fell over their camp. Taking a sip from the bottle, the old man noted that young noblemen often achieved 3 stars before reaching adulthood. He warned the student that such a level was almost unattainable for a commoner, so he shouldn't be too proud of his talent. Almost every time, the mentor repeated the same instructions, claiming that magic depended entirely on noble blood. In fact, behind these words, there was only the bitterness of a man who himself was unable to achieve what he wanted. That night seemed especially long and difficult. The next day, as the young man was returning to camp, a heavy downpour began. When he reached the place, he discovered the old man's body lying motionless on the wet ground. It was covered in a lot of bruises, so the guy decided that the mentor had messed with the wrong person. Seeing no other way out, the young man took a shovel and dug a grave to bury his former teacher. Only later did the hero learn that the old man had been beaten to death by city guards. It turned out he was caught trying to steal a 2-star spell book from a warehouse. No one understood why a man without great ambitions needed to take such a risk. Suddenly, a mysterious system appeared right before the young man's eyes, and the hero silently looked at the screen. The system offered to choose a primary school of magic, and warned that this choice would be final. The guy understood perfectly well that he would never receive the noble blood of this world, because initially, he did not belong to it at all. 4 years passed since that day, and sometime later, a woman named Katja Flameheart arrived in the city. She came from a fallen noble family, but was a powerful 3-star mage who was the subject of intense competition from various mercenary companies. Katja completed several orders and then decided to teach Derek, who at that time only knew the most basic spells. This is how the young man began to gain valuable knowledge under the guidance of an experienced warrior. One sunset they met at the local tavern, Belden's Tier. The mentor noted that the desire to become stronger was natural, and Derek had a lot of talent for this. However, she immediately warned that excessive greed would only slow down his development. The hero listened to her silently and promised to remember this important advice. Katja then asked the student to close his eyes and try to feel the energy flowing through his body. Derek concentrated deeply, trying to imagine the magical power and make it come true. Soon, a dense bluish aura began to rise around the young man. The mentor immediately noticed that he had a surprisingly large reserve of strength and incredibly stable control over mana. With his full focus on his goal, Derek prepared to release all of his pent-up energy at once. At that very moment, Katja, with great shock, saw what was happening with her own eyes. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed throughout the tavern, causing everyone to flinch. The visitors below instantly panicked and began screaming, not understanding where the explosive sound was coming from. While people were rushing around in despair, thinking that the city was under enemy attack, the protagonist was just trying to catch his breath. At that moment, the teacher grabbed the student's wrist tightly, which greatly surprised him. Without explaining anything, she ordered him to remain silent and follow her as quickly as possible. While the mercenaries outside were investigating the cause of the supposed explosion, they quietly took advantage of the confusion and left the tavern. Then both of them walked quickly and in complete silence through the deserted city alleys. Frightened by the unknown, the young man finally asked what had happened. Then Katja stopped, turned around, and asked everyone to listen carefully to everything she was about to tell. Seeing her expression, Derek nodded silently. The mentor explained that the nobles defended their privileges at any cost, and magic was considered the most valuable of them. Natural strength was seen as a blessing for the nobility, and it was incredibly difficult for a commoner to reach the 3-star level. Katja added that even the rare ordinary people who managed to advance so far dedicated their entire lives to it. That's how, at just 14 years old, the young man officially reached the level of a 2-star mage. After that, they went on a journey together, and along the way, Katya taught the hero new techniques and told stories about high society. A whole year passed unnoticed until the moment of separation came. Derek learned that the mentor had been hired by one of the most influential noble families of the Grand Duchy of Duplain as a personal tutor. It was too valuable an opportunity for the girl to refuse. Just before leaving, Katya gave the young man a valuable book with 2-star spells as a sign of affection. The hero carefully accepted the gift and continued adding new skills to the magical list of his system. Another year passed since then, and all this time Derek sat in his room almost constantly, stubbornly studying on his own. Thanks to such work, he managed to master 2 more complex 2-star spells by the age of 16. Not intending to stop there, the young man went to the tavern. There he immediately noticed that the head of the mercenary squad was unusually inspired by some news. Leaning against the wooden counter, the man explained that the order had come directly from the powerful family of the Grand Duchy of Duplain. Hearing this, Derek immediately became wary and asked why such an influential family needed ordinary mercenaries. Then the chief merely chuckled and declared that the rich aristocrats spent gold as easily as the rest spent water. He then added that such work would open many doors for them and help them make useful contacts for future contracts. However, the young man did not give in to his enthusiasm and asked what exactly the assignment was. In response, the man explained that the Duke merely wanted to get rid of a few common monsters roaming his lands. Derek found it completely ridiculous that such a powerful family would seek outside help for such a simple task. Suspecting that there was something suspicious behind the story, the hero immediately refused the offer and headed for the exit. As he was leaving, he said that it would have been better to find another warrior, since he did not want to get involved in dubious affairs. Then the head of the mercenaries shouted irritably that he would have called someone else long ago if it had been possible. However, the customer specifically requested that a magician be included in the squad. Derek remained the only suitable candidate. Despite this, the young man continued to stand his ground and did not want to look for unnecessary trouble. Realizing that he couldn't change his mind with words, the man showed a gold coin, explaining that it was only an advance. The protagonist took the coin and looked at it silently for a while, weighing all the benefits and risks. It was at this moment that mysterious customers who required an escort quietly entered the tavern. The head of the mercenaries asked Derek to greet the guests, but the leader of the arriving group rejected the greeting. The man with the monocle expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that they were offered some boy for such a serious task. The chief of the mercenaries became noticeably nervous and hastened to assure the client that before him stood the best magician in the entire area. However, the nobleman did not even listen to the excuses. He turned away and declared that he would never have entrusted such an important task to a child. At that moment, the woman accompanying him gently touched his shoulder and began to quietly say something in his ear. Then she and the young girl in the blue hood exchanged barely noticeable glances. After this, the hooded girl stepped forward, addressed Derek by name, and offered to discuss the terms in more detail. Thus, the young magician's path directly crossed with the mysterious and influential Grand Duchy of Duplain. Sometime later, in the middle of the forest, one goblin was thrown back with great force by a powerful charge of blue magic. Derek watched his opponent's every move carefully. Then he rushed forward with lightning speed, and with one precise swing of his sword cut the monster in half. At the same moment, another monster tried to attack from behind, roared furiously, and raised its metal axe. However, the hero easily dodged the blow and immediately delivered an accurate counterattack. The monster fell dead at his feet, and the young man's expression didn't even change. Immediately after this, Derek released another blast of blue magic and mercilessly destroyed the last enemy. He then turned to his employers and reported that the task of destroying the monsters had been completed. The man with the monocle and the women accompanying him were genuinely amazed by the speed of the young magician. The hooded girl noted with a smile that he had managed to deal with so many enemies in an incredibly short time. Later, night fell and the group returned safely to the tavern, where they were met by a fair-haired warrior named Pelin. She asked sarcastically if Derek had become a servant for the nobles, and Jaden, the bartender, tried to calm the girl down. However, she slammed her palm down on the counter and declared that commoners should not humiliate themselves by serving the aristocracy. Then the leader of the squad quietly asked if she knew how much they would pay for this assignment. These words only angered Pelin even more. In response, the man showed the size of the reward with his fingers. The girl decided that he was talking about just 1 silver coin. Seeing her reaction, Jaden just shook his head, saying that she was wrong. When Pelin realized the true size of the reward, her eyes literally lit up with greed. At that very moment, she completely changed her mind and began to beg him to take her along on this mission. Meanwhile, deep night fell upon the city. Pelin, completely exhausted, fell asleep right behind the tavern counter, muttering something incoherently in his sleep. Derek told the squad leader that the mission in the forest turned out to be very simple and only involved destroying a few weak monsters. However, the main character then seriously added that all 3 clients were clearly hiding their true identities. Jaden immediately stopped what he was doing and was genuinely shocked by such a statement. The hero explained that the man posing as a recruiting officer did not behave like a real specialist. Moreover, the woman who called herself a servant had hands that were too clean for a person engaged in hard labor. Derek continued to share his suspicions regarding the true role of each of the mysterious clients. But, noticing the unusually serious expression on the commander's face, he immediately stopped. Jaden advised him not to interfere in other people's affairs, reminding him that a mercenary's duty was to complete the mission. The protagonist thought about his boss's words for a moment and eventually agreed with his advice. He understood perfectly well that the captain was right, because in that cruel world, the most important thing was survival. The next day, they set off for the Grand Duchy's luxurious main estate, Duplain. Having completed his inspection of the surrounding area, Derek informed his clients that the forest monsters would not cause any problems for a long time. The man was pleased and praised the squad for their excellent work, while Jaden negotiated the payment of the remaining part of the reward. The nobleman then took out 2 heavy gold coins and handed them over as a reward. Having received such a sum, the captain was delighted and, rejoicing at his unexpected luck, began to ruffle the young man's hair. However, the man with the monocle quietly cleared his throat, attracting attention, and politely interrupted the celebration. He then said that he highly appreciated the young man's potential and wanted to offer him a new, special assignment. Surprised by such unexpected interest from the high nobility, Derek asked to hear more about the proposal. The client then announced that the Grand Duke's family was willing to pay 15 gold coins for the completion of a new secret mission. After this, he looked closely at the hero and asked if he would agree to accept such an unusual challenge. Such a generous reward could change his life, so the protagonist gave his consent without much hesitation. Soon they got into the carriage and headed towards the main palace. Upon arrival, both mercenaries were amazed by the gigantic size of the imperial residence. Jaden looked at the luxurious furnishings with undisguised admiration. Just before the entrance, the man with the monocle stopped briefly and announced that it was time to formally introduce himself. He stated that his name was Delon and that he held the position of chief butler in the service of the Grand Duke Duplain. Realizing the kind of person he was communicating with without any formalities, Jaden broke out in a cold sweat and became nervous. Immediately after this, the woman also introduced herself, stating that her name was Katarina and that she was the head maid. Jaden quickly bowed to them, expressing sincere respect, while Derek maintained his usual calm. He had suspected from the very beginning that such influential people were pretending to be commoners in order to test his abilities. At that moment, an elegant girl in a long blue dress approached them. The protagonist turned around curiously, while Jaden wondered who this mysterious stranger could be. With a smooth movement, the girl threw back the hood of her blue cloak, revealing her long dark hair. Now they fluttered beautifully in the wind. Seeing the face of an incredibly beautiful girl, Derek froze for a moment. The girl introduced herself as Aiseline Eleanor Duplain. She was the eldest daughter of the Grand Duke, and wanted to hire Derek as a magic tutor for her younger sister. Hearing this, the hero was completely shocked that he was offered to become a mentor to a young aristocrat. After this, the carriage headed back to the main gate of the stately Duplain estate. Suddenly, the doors of the Duke's office swung open. A young man named Reg rushed into the room, loudly demanding the attention of his father and brother. The Duke, sitting at his desk, immediately scolded his son for his inappropriate behavior. However, Reg indignantly stated that Dila should have been taught the proper rules of decency. He said that the girl had long ago crossed all boundaries and even attacked the servants. Then Valerian intervened, asking his brother to speak more quietly so as not to disturb the important conversation. However, the young man continued to claim that over the course of a month, more than 10 servants had resigned precisely because of Diela's behavior. He then approached his father's desk and demanded to know how long he was going to turn a blind eye to what was happening. After this, Valerian finally lost his patience and loudly called out to his brother, forcing him to stop. He then ordered Reg in a cold tone to immediately shut up and leave the room. The young man cast a look full of hatred at his brother, but despite this, he again tried to convince his father. He stated that even if Diela was beyond repair, the family still had the talented Aiseline. Then he suggested finally getting rid of Diela and letting her go. In response, the Duke slowly removed his glasses and said that he would not be allowed to make such a decision. However, Reg continued to insist, explaining that he had already found a good monastery where his sister could live in complete isolation. Before Reg could finish speaking, the Duke suddenly rose from his seat and, in a fit of rage, grabbed his son by the head. He then slammed his face into the wooden table with great force. After this, he threateningly repeated that he had already repeatedly warned the young man not to interfere in family affairs. Reg just gritted his teeth in anger and said that sooner or later his father would still have to make a decision. However, the head of the family only silently looked at his son with contempt. Meanwhile, Aiseline escorted Derek through the palace's opulent corridors to the great audience chamber. On the way, the girl asked the hero if he had ever heard of her younger sister, and he replied that he had only seen her name in the register. Then the girl sadly admitted that her sister was deliberately hidden from the public eye. Soon the servants opened the doors of the Grand Duke's office. As she entered, Aislinn was surprised to see Valerian standing next to Rhaeg, who was trying to cover up the marks of his recent beating. The older brother greeted his sister warmly and asked how her trip to Ebelstein had gone. The girl gratefully replied that the trip had been very comfortable thanks to his care. Valerian then said that he had to help his wounded brother first, suggesting that they talk later. All this time, Derek silently watched what was happening with his usual attentive gaze. Both brothers walked past him with serious faces, without saying a word. Then the main character noticed the maid. She cried quietly in the corner of the office. He remembered this detail as he prepared for his conversation with the head of the Duplain family. Sitting at his desk, the Duke noted with relief that his daughter's trip to the neighboring city had gone well. Aislinn smiled and took the moment to introduce Derek as her younger sister's new magic teacher. The Duke looked at the young man carefully with an appraising glance. Deciding that her father was busy with state affairs, the girl suggested leaving him alone. However, when they were about to leave, the Duke ordered the young magician to stay. Derek stopped immediately at the door and turned around. After Aislinn left, the office fell silent. The owner of the palace continued to write concentratedly on the parchment, without raising his eyes. He then asked if the guest was really only 16 years old. Having settled down on a luxurious sofa, the young man confirmed his age. Then the Duke asked if he really possessed magic. The hero replied that he could only use the small magic of the first star. Hearing this answer, the Duke chuckled quietly and remarked that there was no point in downplaying his own abilities. He stated that false modesty was not always considered a virtue. Derek, however, remained calm, realizing that it was pointless to pretend to be a harmless person in front of the fifth-star mage. Then he apologized if he seemed impolite. In response, the nobleman stated that he understood such caution, given the young man's outstanding talent. The Duke then noted that, in his simple clothes and appearance, he did not at all resemble an ordinary teacher. The protagonist explained that he was actually a mercenary. Upon hearing this, the man said that he trusted his daughter's choice and therefore allowed him to enter the residence where Diela lived. Then he ordered the maid to show the guest out and was about to finish the conversation. However, Derek asked permission to ask one last question. The hero explained that as a professional, he was obliged to ensure that Diela truly learned to master magic. He emphasized that Aislinn's main goal was to help her sister finally become a worthy representative of high society. However, the Duke remained completely unperturbed and asked why the young man repeated such obvious things. Then Derek admitted that he was only leading the conversation to one request addressed personally to the head of the family. Hearing this, the Duke frowned, curious about what he dared to ask him. At this point, the action moved to another part of the palace, where someone was now throwing dishes at the walls. The frightened maid screamed and immediately began to apologize. However, Diela said that given her status, her apology would not change anything. She then ordered the girl to disappear immediately and threatened to attack her again if she ever caught her eye again. Meanwhile, in the other room, Jaden asked Aislinn why they chose Derek. He noticed that the Duplain family probably had plenty of famous magicians willing to teach, but they had chosen a commoner. Aislinn admitted that she had already tried to hire almost all the famous mentors, but each of them refused. The captain then noted that Derek, despite his life as a mercenary, was well versed in noble etiquette and manners. The girl replied that she hoped that the young man's kindness would help soften her sister's difficult character. Hearing this, Jaden chuckled softly and noted with irony that she should have been more knowledgeable about people. He explained that the hero grew up fighting for his life on the streets, and it was impossible to survive such a nightmare with kindness alone. After these words, Aislinn was silent for a long time. At the same time, the main character silently walked along the luxurious corridors of the palace, accompanied by the head butler and a maid. Soon the magician stopped in front of the huge double doors leading to Diela's private chambers. The young man knocked on the door, announcing his arrival. Then he waited silently for a few seconds for an answer. Hearing no response, Derek realized that the door would not be opened for him. Then he took hold of the metal handle. The guy carefully opened the door and walked inside, politely greeting the hostess. After calmly introducing himself, the hero noticed that Diela was sitting on a chair in the center of the room, her back turned to him. Without even turning around, the girl sharply ordered him to come closer. The young man approached, maintaining his usual calm. At that moment, a malicious grin appeared on the girl's face. Suddenly, a large bucket filled with dirty water flew at the main character with force. Derek was instantly soaked from head to toe, but he only closed his eyes and didn't react in any way. Diela burst out laughing, starting to insult her mentor, calling him a sewer rat and mocking his pathetic appearance. She then inquired whether the mercenary the head butler had hired was really considered so talented. Diela said she thought he looked more like a garbage rat. Continuing to enjoy her mockery, the girl climbed onto the soft stool with her shoes still on. After this, she contemptuously declared that the dirty water perfectly matched the commoner's origins. Meanwhile, Derek remained silent as water dripped from his hair. The girl then threw the bucket on the floor and noted with a sneer that she only regretted that she had no more water left. Then the main character slowly opened his eyes and looked at the girl with a cold, calm gaze. Unexpectedly for herself, Diela stepped back and involuntarily shuddered. Realizing she was scared, she kicked him in the chest and demanded to know how a commoner could even look at her. Meanwhile, the young man fell to the floor, while the girl continued to look at him with arrogance. Then she grimaced in disgust, pinching her nose with her fingers in displeasure and taking off her shoes. She said he smelled foul of sewage. After this, the impudent girl threw her shoe at Derek. But even after that, she continued to mock. She stated that the street urchin should have remembered his place and that he clearly lacked common sense. Meanwhile, in the main office of the palace, the Duke was thinking about his recent conversation with Derek. He stood silently by the huge window, thoughtfully watching what was happening outside. Derek had remarked shortly before that, since he had been invited, it meant that Diela's behavioral problems were serious. After this, the young man decided to ask the man a question, knowing that he loved Lady Diela more than anyone else. He asked how much power the head of the family was willing to grant him. The nobleman listened to the question, fully understanding that raising a rebellious daughter would require very harsh measures. Meanwhile, in the room, Diela clutched her cheek in complete shock, not believing that this commoner had just slapped her. Derek himself showed no regret whatsoever and ordered her to get up from the floor immediately. However, the girl did not listen to him, and then he gave her another slap. Diela lay on the floor in horror, unable to believe what Derek had just done. He continued to stand directly above her, and there was not a drop of pity on his face. He remembered a day 3 years before these events. Their carriage was slowly driving along a forest road. Then the young man asked his mentor how she would deal with an extremely stubborn and disobedient student. Katya replied that she would first try to understand such a person and would show him maximum patience. The hero noted that this approach seemed too idealistic and asked what to do if the student did not accept kindness at all. Then the mentor explained that if understanding did not help, it was necessary to look for a completely different approach. She added that the last resort was to plant real fear deep in the student's heart. Returning to the present, Diela continued to stand motionless, pressing her palm to her reddened cheek. Derek warned her that from now on she had to treat people with respect and ordered her to stand up again. Trembling with both rage and humiliation, the girl placed her hands on the floor and rose to her feet. Then, filled with hatred, she suddenly rushed forward and hit the young man in the face with all her strength. After this, the girl screamed, indignant that some insignificant commoner dared to raise his hand against her. However, she didn't have time to finish her tirade, as she immediately received another strong slap in the face. The protagonist repeated in an icy voice that from now on she had to learn to respect others. The girl only laughed nervously, still unable to believe the new mentor's audacity. Then she loudly demanded that the butler immediately punish the commoner who dared to raise his hand against her. Delon hurried to the girl, anxiously asking if she was hurt. The butler then scolded Derek severely and warned him that the consequences would be dire if the Duke found out about what had happened. However, Derek pulled out a folded piece of official parchment from his clothes and handed it to the butler. The document contained a permission signed by the Duke, giving him complete freedom to choose any teaching methods. Delon adjusted his monocle, carefully read the document, and froze in complete amazement. Seeing the shocked reaction of her faithful butler, Diela was completely speechless and froze in place. Meanwhile, night fell over the Duplain family castle. Valerian walked through the corridors of the palace, seething with anger, while Reg tried unsuccessfully to calm his older brother. Reaching the guest room, he threw the door open and demanded to see the mercenary everyone was talking about. Derek sat on the couch, gathering his things, and didn't show the slightest concern. Filled with rage, Valerian was about to pounce on the young man, but Reg barely held his brother back. Then the protagonist explained that the method of education he had chosen was fully approved by the Grand Duke himself. Reg then reminded his brother that Derek was an official guest of Aislinn, and his appointment had been personally approved by the Duke. Hearing this, Valerian ordered the new mentor to follow him and told Rega not to interfere. He only smiled understandingly and noted that the rebellious sister should have been taught a good lesson long ago. However, the young man preferred to remain silent and not continue this conversation. Watching them go, Reg quietly said that he didn't understand why Valerian continued to defend such a troubled girl. Meanwhile, the young people found themselves in a dark corner of the palace where old porcelain dolls lay. Valerian opened the door and invited Derek into his sister's former room. He explained that Diela had lived here until she was moved out of the main mansion and that nothing had changed in the premises since then. The main character slowly approached the easel, where a beautiful landscape painting stood. Valerian remembered that his younger sister had once loved to draw and was always embarrassed when she asked him to evaluate her work. However, the girl never finished the paintings, leaving many areas blank and drawing only what she liked. The nobleman then apologized for his recent outburst, but Derek replied that he held no grudge against him. Looking at the canvases scattered around the room, the young man asked why he had been brought here in the first place. Valerian sadly admitted that he wanted to show that Diela was not a bad person at all and did not deserve hatred. However, over time, the girl became fixated on the purity of her noble origins, and eventually, she was moved to a separate wing. According to him, if Diela could master at least the magic of the first star, he could convince his father not to send her to the monastery. After this, Valerian put his hands on Derek's shoulders and asked him to save his sister's life. The protagonist asked to wait a little, noticing a curious detail in the books on the shelf. He noticed that the girl had not given up on studying magic, as the margins of her textbooks were covered with her notes. He then asked whether these books were part of the Academy's curriculum, and Valerian confirmed that they were used to teach members of the nobility. Derek thought for a moment, considering the plan that had come to him. Then his attention was drawn to a fully completed painting of a dense green forest. At that moment, the hero had a new idea, and he slammed the book shut. The hero then turned to Valerian and stated that he was going to try to solve this problem immediately. Later, late at night, we are transported to Diela's room. The girl slept peacefully in her bed, not even suspecting what kind of awakening awaited her ahead. Suddenly, someone poured a whole bucket of ice water onto the bed. Diela woke up suddenly and screamed in horror, instantly becoming soaked through. Derek stood next to the bed and asked if she really thought it was a good time to sleep. Shivering from the cold, the girl looked at the young man with hatred and indignantly declared that he had completely lost his mind. However, the hero did not allow her to continue. He grabbed her hand and ordered her to follow him, completely ignoring her screams. He dragged Diela through the palace corridors while she screamed in pain and begged the maids to stop this commoner. Stepping outside the castle, they found themselves under the bright light of the full moon. Derek walked across the open field, continuing to lead the girl further and further away from the palace. Then he abruptly let go of her, and the girl fell right onto the grass, screaming again in pain and indignation. Looking up at him with a furious gaze, Diela demanded to know what he was trying to achieve with such actions. Then the hero looked at her and offered to listen to one curious thing, since she refused to accept advice. He stated that he had no intention of actually teaching her magic, but simply enjoyed beating up arrogant nobles. Hearing these words, Diela froze in horror. Then Derek added that he was a man who grew up in the very bottom of society. He had no reason to feel sympathy for the nobility, and his job as a personal tutor was just a convenient cover. Afterwards, he explained that this was the perfect opportunity for him to teach spoiled aristocrats like her a lesson. Derek drew his sword and asked if she had any idea how beautiful the sound of the aristocrats' desperate cries could be. Diela tried to object, asking if he really expected to go unpunished after something like that. In response, the guy mockingly declared that he had absolutely nothing to fear, since she was soon to be sent to a monastery anyway. If necessary, he could simply disappear, and the Duplan family would probably only be glad to be relieved of their headache. At that moment, a terrible thought struck Diela. She really could die right here. Realizing that if she remained where she was, she would inevitably end up in his hands, the girl instantly jumped up and rushed towards the forest. She understood perfectly well that escaping across the open field to the castle would end in immediate capture. Therefore, the girl decided to hide among the dense trees, which she knew well from childhood. The girl hoped to confuse her pursuer, make a circle, and then quietly return to the estate. However, soon a bright reddish glow, accompanied by intense heat, flared up behind the fugitive. Then, in the darkness, a huge fiery sphere began to rapidly form, illuminating the entire forest. Diela turned around to see Derek following behind, holding a giant fireball above his head with one hand. The girl froze in complete horror at this sight. She immediately realized that this was the complex magic of the second star. However, she could not comprehend how an ordinary commoner could master such a high level. Seeing her despair, the main character only smiled contentedly. The next moment, a huge fireball rushed through the trees at incredible speed straight towards her. Feeling the unbearable heat, Diela screamed in panic. The next moment, the girl threw herself on the ground, screaming. Almost immediately behind her, a gigantic explosion thundered, raising a thick curtain of smoke and dust into the air. The girl caught her breath with difficulty, continuing to tremble from the horror she had experienced. Meanwhile, Derek emerged from the clouds of smoke and noted with a slight chuckle that he had missed. As a result, the forest turned into the scene of a fierce chase. Without wasting any time, Diela jumped up again and ran with all her might. Completely exhausted and breathing heavily, she continued to run. However, the girl soon tripped over a thick tree root. In an instant, she lost her balance and fell to the ground. Despite the pain, she tried to get up and continue running. Suddenly, several shining blue arrows made of magical energy whistled past her. Diela's eyes widened as she realized her pursuer had cast a new spell. She tried to crawl back, but arrows one after another pierced the ground, completely blocking her escape route. Finding herself trapped, the girl froze in fear. Meanwhile, Derek noticed that she was quite fast for someone who was permanently locked in a separate wing of the palace. Diela, covered in dirt and breathing heavily, looked at him silently. However, despite her fatigue, she once again gathered her last strength, stood up, and once again rushed into the depths of the forest. The main character didn't even try to catch up with her. Diela ran on, wondering if she would be able to break away from him at all. At this rate, he would definitely catch her. And then she suddenly heard a strange sound behind her. Derek dropped to one knee and touched the ground with his palm. A blue magic circle appeared under his hand. Peering into the dark forest path, the boy suddenly remembered the picture he had seen earlier in Diela's room. Then he realized that this very forest had served as her favorite refuge since childhood. The girl unconsciously felt the natural flow of magical energy of this place and transferred her impressions onto canvases. Realizing this, Derek realized that behind her difficult character, there was a truly outstanding natural talent. Suddenly, Diela jumped out of the bushes with a huge stone in her hands and, screaming loudly, rushed at him. However, the guy instantly drew his sword and prepared to defend himself. With one swift blow, he split the boulder in half, and losing her balance, the girl fell to the ground again. Gritting her teeth in anger and despair, she realized that her last attempt had been useless. Derek admitted that her determination was worthy of respect, as she chose to fight rather than continue her pointless escape. Diela was left lying on the grass, completely exhausted and unable to resist. The protagonist looked at her, noticing that she no longer had the strength to continue the fight. He then pointed the sword straight at the girl and threateningly asked if she had anything else she wanted to say. In response, the girl only stated with contempt that she would not humiliate herself before an insignificant commoner and ask for forgiveness. After this, she demanded that he finish what he started as soon as possible. Derek then asked why the girl was so obsessed with her noble origins. This question touched a deep emotional wound that Diela had hidden for many years. She admitted that if she lost the only thing she had, the prestige of her family, there would be nothing left of her existence. Having completely lost her composure, the girl said that she was completely incapable of mastering magic. Through tears, the girl asked if he really thought she never tried to live up to her family's expectations. Diela then admitted that all her attempts invariably ended in failure, both in magic and in painting. This made her constantly feel useless and behind everyone else. The girl considered her noble origin to be the only thing that still gave her value, and without it, she would be nothing. Curled up on the ground, she sobbed quietly, not understanding what place she occupied in this world. The protagonist just watched her motionless. Suddenly, the blade of his sword was enveloped in a bright blue glow. Diela closed her eyes and silently awaited the fatal blow. Then Derek raised his glowing sword and declared that he had had enough of these complaints. Looking at the girl's tear-stained face, he said that this was where he said goodbye to her. Having said goodbye to the girl, the hero quickly delivered a powerful vertical blow. Diela closed her eyes tightly and winced, expecting pain. However, nothing happened. At the moment of impact, her magic created a huge barrier of sharp ice crystals around the girl. Slowly opening her eyes, she was amazed to see an ice wall sparkling in the moonlight. Derek stood opposite, watching as the girl found herself in the very center of the intact barrier. Looking down at her hands, Diela noticed that they were enveloped in a blue glow and couldn't believe that she had finally awakened her power. Having accomplished his plan, the guy put the sword back into its sheath. Then he bowed respectfully, congratulated her on her success, and sincerely apologized for his previous rudeness. The girl silently tried to comprehend what had happened. Derek explained that she had only managed to create a manifestation of mana, but the main thing was that she had finally been able to do it. Realizing that she was indeed capable of using magic, Diela bit her lip. She burst into loud sobs of relief, pouring out all the pain and despair that had been building up inside her for many years. The hero just stood silently next to her, allowing her to release her pent-up feelings. Soon the forest was once again plunged into its usual silence. After a while, they sat down on a fallen tree, and Derek explained that the girl was actually a member of the wildlife school. Most nobles studied the magic of the School of Order, but its abilities required a completely different approach. Trying to master traditional methods was as futile for her as trying to put on clothes that didn't fit. Surprised, Diela asked how he had managed to determine her true magical predisposition. Then the protagonist explained that he realized this after studying her paintings. She felt the mana flowing freely in nature and involuntarily conveyed this connection on her canvases. He also added that magicians with such a natural gift intuitively sensed the mana around them from childhood. After finishing the bandage, Derek reported that she could already walk, and the girl noted with relief that the pain in her leg had completely disappeared. As they headed back, the hero warned that awakening the mana was only the first step, and training would begin tomorrow. A few moments later, Diela called out to him quietly, causing the young man to stop. She awkwardly crossed her arms and thanked him for his help. Derek was silent for a few seconds, maintaining a calm expression on his face. After that, he simply suggested that they move on, and the girl happily followed alongside. On the way, the guy complimented her painting of the sunset, and Diela shyly admitted that she considered this work her main masterpiece. The next morning, the sun's rays penetrated through the windows of the luxurious Duplan palace. Waking up in her bed, Diela immediately raised her hand to test her new abilities. A soft blue glow appeared around her fingers, proving that the events of last night were real. The girl watched the mana with a determined and happy look until the glow dissipated into a light gray smoke. After that, she quietly grumbled that it was still very difficult to control this power. Meanwhile, in the corridor, a maid was carrying a wooden bucket filled with water. Suddenly, the door to Diela's room swung open, causing the woman to scream in fear. In surprise, she dropped the bucket and water flew in all directions. She splashed the girl's legs and the hem of her blue dress. Turning pale with fear, the maid began to apologize, fearing severe punishment for her mistake. Diela looked at her with a serious gaze for a few seconds. The maid fell to her knees, pressing her forehead to the floor, and began to beg for forgiveness, repeating that she had made a terrible mistake. However, to her surprise, the girl walked past her and only told her to be more careful where she was going in the future. The maid could not understand why she was not beaten and punished as severely as had happened before. Then the rest of the maids hurried to help her up and began to whisper, wondering what had happened to their mistress. Meanwhile, Derek slept peacefully in his room, enjoying his rest. However, the boy soon woke up abruptly, hearing someone loudly shouting his name and pounding on the door without stopping. Rubbing his eyes with a tired movement, the hero opened the door to find out who had been making such a noise since early morning. Diela and the butler Delon stood at the threshold. The girl immediately demanded that he begin teaching her how to control mana. Having heard such incredible news from his mistress, Delon froze. The girl insisted that Derek fulfill his promise and begin magic lessons immediately. However, the protagonist simply closed the door right in front of her and told her to return only after noon. The butler was so moved by his mistress's success that he could not hold back his tears of joy. Diela began to furiously knock on the door, demanding that the guy open it and start teaching her magical techniques. Despite all the girl's screams and protests, the young man completely ignored the noise and returned to sleep. Time flew by, and soon it was midday at the Duplain estate. Meanwhile, various rumors began to spread through the corridors of the palace. The maids discussed how Diela hadn't broken a single plate and had even spared the maid who had accidentally spilled water on her. They then excitedly began to spread the word that the girl had finally managed to manifest her mana. This conversation was accidentally overheard by Rig, who was passing nearby, and immediately stopped in the middle of the corridor. Then the guy turned around abruptly and demanded to know what exactly the workers were talking about. Meanwhile, in the main office, the head of the Duplain family, the Duke, asked if his daughter had really managed to manifest mana. Valerian happily confirmed that he had heard the same news from the head butler. The Duke breathed a sigh of relief and admitted that this news was a great relief to him. However, they were interrupted by Reg, who stated that they shouldn't have jumped to conclusions just because of one manifestation of mana. Valerian reproached his younger brother, saying that he should support his sister and praise her for such an important achievement. Reg, however, continued to insist that his sister's past mistakes could not be so easily forgotten. Just one small success should not have changed the decision to send her to a monastery. The Duke remained silent for a while, carefully weighing the arguments of both sons. Meanwhile, we are transported to another place. Diela sat on her bed in a beautiful red dress, but her face showed strong displeasure. Derek walked up to the girl and asked if she really intended to start the day with another tantrum. In response, the girl angrily stated that she had not made a scene at all, but was simply very angry because of his behavior. The guy scratched the back of his head and noticed that such a dissatisfied expression on his face would not change anything at all. However, Diela insisted that she was not being capricious at all, but was simply openly expressing her dissatisfaction with her mentor. Then the hero explained that there was a correct order in the study of magic, and each stage had its own time. However, the girl did not want to listen to this at all, and stated that he should finally understand that she was angry. The white-haired young man just looked at her with a completely unperturbed gaze, without reacting in any way. Realizing that her screams hadn't worked at all, Diela sheepishly admitted that he was right. After this, Derek pulled up a wooden chair and sat directly opposite his new student. He then explained that awakening the power did not mean being able to use it freely. However, Diela only mockingly stated that he turned out to be too boring and old-fashioned a teacher. At that moment, Derek asked threateningly if she would prefer a less boring way of learning. A chill instantly ran down the girl's spine as she immediately remembered the terrifying chase in the forest. Swallowing her pride, the girl said she preferred not to return to the topic again. After this, Derek explained that all future training would focus on free energy control. The School of Wildlife gave mages much more freedom, allowing them to develop at their own pace. He added that the style perfectly suited her free-spirited nature, and these words visibly surprised Diela. He noted that her free spirit, combined with her Duplain blood, meant she possessed outstanding natural talent. Hearing such unexpected praise from her demanding mentor, Diela blushed embarrassedly. Looking away, the girl shyly asked if he really thought she was talented. Derek confirmed that creating an ice barrier immediately after the first awakening of mana was an impressive achievement. They then went on to discuss the difference between ordinary talent and true magical genius. Meanwhile, Rig was walking in the palace garden and heard their conversation coming from the window of his younger sister's room. Realizing that Diela was indeed progressing very quickly in her training, the boy clenched his teeth in irritation. The next day, the bright sun rose again over the castle's surroundings. Early in the morning, Diela opened the door to Derek's room and said that she could now control mana much more easily. Another day later, while the protagonist was having breakfast, the girl appeared next to him again, showing the flames shining on her fingers. The next day, Diela followed him tirelessly, constantly asking questions about training. Finally, the boy decided to take shelter under a spreading tree in the field, hoping to finally read. However, the girl quickly found him and began to loudly complain, demanding that he immediately return and continue his studies. The hero said that her father lent him the spellbooks specifically for training. Then Diela demanded to evaluate her progress, saying that she had already learned to direct energy exactly as he explained. Meanwhile, Valerian stood thoughtfully at the window of his room. Suddenly the door swung open and Derek walked into the room, asking if he had been called. The blonde confirmed this in a friendly manner and invited the young man to sit down for a conversation. Valerian immediately asked how Diela's lessons were progressing, and Derek replied that the girl was developing very quickly. However, he warned that she would still need time and persistent training to fully master the magic of the first star. Her brother nodded understandingly and informed her that their mother was due back at the castle the following week. He warned Derek not to underestimate her, as most nobles did not like to see commoners in important positions. The protagonist assured that he would take this into account, and then asked if this was really why he had been invited. Valerian was silent for a moment. After this, he explained that as the future head of the Duplain family, he considered it his duty to protect every member of the family. However, he admitted that achieving true family unity was very difficult because the feelings and views of all people were different. Not one for long discussions, Derek asked him directly what exactly he was getting at. Suddenly Valerian clenched his fists and fell silent. After this, he confessed that his beloved younger sister categorically refused to play with him, no matter what. Derek just looked at him silently, his gaze cold and bored. While Derek drank tea, Valerian nostalgically recalled his childhood, when his sister greeted him with a happy smile, like an angel. Then he approached the hero and began to beg him to give at least some advice that would help him regain the girl's favor. At that moment, a girl's voice was heard from the distant corridors, loudly calling for her mentor. After this, the nobleman asked him to wait a little and showed him a doll that he and his maids had sewn as a gift for his sister. He happily declared that the toy was remarkably similar to Diela and perfectly conveyed all his brotherly love. Derek looked at this strange creation and asked if he was going to cast a spell with this doll. Valerian immediately burst into tears and complained with resentment that his interlocutor was completely ignorant of spiritual matters. Meanwhile, Duchess Duplain returned to the palace. Derek was formally introduced to the mistress of the Duplain family in the main hall. The Duchess remarked that she had already heard a lot about the new mentor and was glad that they had decided to hire such a capable magic teacher. She then introduced herself as Muriel Dibel Duplain and offered to send him a gift to his domain as a token of gratitude. However, Derek replied that he was not associated with noble houses. This answer noticeably surprised and puzzled the Duchess. Then the hero declared that he was just a commoner. This confession came as a real shock to Muriela, her face instantly distorted with shock and indignation. A week before these events, a luxurious carriage stopped in front of the family's residence. Iselin said a warm goodbye to Derek and thanked him for his help. She would like to spend more time with her little sister. However, she was forced to return to Ebelstein, so she entrusted Diela's further training to him. The protagonist merely nodded, assuring her that he would take care of the girl's training. Then Jaden gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder and smiled as he noted that he had responded too dryly to such a beautiful young girl. After that, he advised Derek to finish his business quickly and return home before Pelin caused a real scandal. The guy silently watched the luxurious carriage as it gradually disappeared into the distance. Meanwhile, inside the crew, Iselin suddenly covered her mouth with her hand, remembering one very important detail. Her mother was supposed to return to the castle next week, but she still hadn't told Derek about it. Not quite understanding her concern, Jaden asked if the Duchess's return was really that big of a deal. Then Iselin explained that their mother was an extremely difficult person. She was practically the embodiment of anger. Meanwhile, in the palace study, Muriela was furiously scolding the Grand Duke Duplain. The woman categorically refused to accept the fact that a simple commoner became the tutor of their youngest daughter. The Duke continued signing the documents and only quietly asked his wife to speak a little more quietly. However, the woman did not calm down, claiming that the main reason for concern remained Diela's future. Then the Duke admitted that he himself did not feel much sympathy for the appointment of commoners to positions of responsibility. However, he reminded his wife that all the noble mentors had long since refused to teach their daughter. Finding a good magic teacher turned out to be a lie, and the young man was personally recommended by Iselin, whom he trusted completely. The woman wearily clutched her head and again insisted that the family was obliged to maintain at least minimal traditions. Then she remembered her younger brother and suggested inviting him to teach her niece. However, the Duke asked whether it was really worth distracting the man responsible for managing the Ebelstein lands. But Muriela irritably retorted that their family should have been especially careful about protecting its reputation. In the world of nobles, a mentor's reputation meant everything, and Diela's appearance next to a commoner would make the girl an object of ridicule. At that moment, the office doors suddenly swung open, interrupting their argument. Valerian entered the room and immediately tried to calm his parents down, asking his mother to stop arguing with his father. However, the Duchess looked at her eldest son and said that she had no intention of leaving the matter. Soon, Reg entered the office, and the guy stated that the dispute could have been resolved very simply. They only had to check whether the commoner really deserved the position of mentor. If Derek could prove his abilities in combat, his origins would no longer be such a serious issue for the family. He then proposed to have a magical duel with the mentor to test his real skills. However, the Duke immediately rejected this idea, stating that Derek had already proven his qualifications and was fit for the position of mentor. Reg remained silent, but it was clear from his look that he had no intention of giving up on his plan. Then the guy quickly changed tactics and suggested checking not the mentor himself, but Diela. Hearing this proposal, Valerian's eyes widened in surprise. Reg explained that if Derek was an outstanding teacher, his student should have demonstrated results in practice. Duke Duplain only sighed heavily upon hearing his son's new initiative. Without waiting for a final answer, Reg turned around and left the office. Valerian immediately hurried after him, trying to stop his brother. He asked what he was even thinking about, suggesting a duel for their younger sister, who had only recently started training. However, Reg objected, asking if his brother really believed so easily that Diela had changed. Valerian continued to insist that she was their only sister, and therefore, the family had a duty to protect her. Hearing these words, Reg only laughed mockingly, clearly not sharing his views, which were based solely on blood relationship. Reg irritably stated that it was Diela's behavior that could ruin the family's reputation. It would be the beginning of the end for the entire clan. Valerian couldn't believe that he could speak so cruelly about his own family. Then Reg said that it was Diela who crossed the line first, and therefore, for the greater good, she should remain locked up. The older brother just watched him silently. Meanwhile, the guy walked forward, intending to prove his case in the upcoming duel. Meanwhile, we are transported to another place. Diela swung open the door to Derek's room and shouted her mentor's name. The young man looked up from his reading and asked about the reason for such an early noise. Without saying a word, the girl threw the rolled-up official scroll directly onto the open book. She then announced that if he lost the upcoming magical duel with his brother, the young man would be fired immediately. The protagonist studied the document and noticed that since Reg was already an experienced one-star mage, it would be almost impossible to defeat him. Hearing this, Diela became desperate and indignantly asked if this was really all he could say in response to the threat of dismissal. However, Derek, with his usual calm, explained that he was just a mercenary doing his job. He also added that he had already received enough money and considered it fully deserved payment for his services. The girl's eyes widened in shock, painfully taking in his indifference. A whole week has passed since then. Meanwhile, family members and the most loyal servants gathered at the palace training ground. Duke Duplain entered the arena with his wife and faithful butler. Derek was already waiting for them at the place and bowed respectfully. The Duke nodded amiably, noting his punctuality. The protagonist remained completely calm and once again respectfully greeted those gathered. Watching his mentor, the Duke noticed that he did not look worried at all. As he sat on the throne, he reflected that he had extraordinary courage to remain calm at such a tense moment. Soon the first participant in the duel headed towards the arena. Reg stepped forward, his long cloak fluttering in the wind. The young nobleman was determined to prove his superiority and completely destroy his younger sister's reputation. He vowed to make Diela pay dearly for all her past actions. A moment later, the girl herself appeared from the opposite side of the yard. Walking forward in a long red cloak with a hood that hid part of her face, she remembered her recent conversation with her mentor. Then Diela asked Derek if he was really only interested in money. In response, he explained that her training was moving in the right direction, although she could not yet use the magic of the first star. He added that her ability to easily control mana was due to the blood of the Duplain family, which greatly surprised the girl. The hero recalled that the wildlife school was built on independent learning, not on blind adherence to strict rules. Unable to bear the tension, Diela burst into tears and asked why he was talking about this now. However, Derek didn't answer her at first. With her head down, the girl admitted that she understood perfectly well how far she was from being called a talented student. She also admitted that more than anything in the world she wanted to continue studying with him and did not want another mentor. The protagonist watched her silently for a while. He then adjusted his gloves and warned in advance that he had never participated in official noble duels before. However, he knew very well how to teach a person to win in a fight, so he asked if she really wanted to win. Hearing these words, Diela again remembered all the ridicule of the nobles who for years claimed that she did not have an ounce of talent for magic. Her childhood flashed before her eyes when she had to endure evil whispers that because of her, the Duplain family was falling into decline. She was constantly compared to her older brothers, called a disgrace to the family who would one day destroy her own father. Filled with determination, the girl looked at her mentor and asked him to make sure that she could win. Returning her thoughts to the present, Diella headed towards the arena, realizing that she now represented more than just the Duplain family. Derek watched his student. He realized that the person standing in front of Reg was no longer his younger sister. Now in the arena was a real magician and his own apprentice. Finally, both opponents took their places opposite each other in the very center of the arena. Then the butler Delon announced that the duel would be held according to the same rules as in the hall of Kelbram Ebelstein. The loser was the one whose magic protective circle was activated first. After this, the participants took their positions, and the signal was given to begin the long-awaited duel. Diella used an expensive necklace created by General Pelham as her protective artifact. Derek chuckled, thinking that the nobles were wasting so much money on such expensive jewelry just for a training duel. Without wasting any time, Reg began casting a spell, causing a bright green magical energy to flare up around his body. Diella remained standing motionless, although powerful gusts of wind fluttered her red hood. Then the young nobleman concentrated all his strength on his fingertips. He looked at his sister with disdain and said that she would soon have to return to confinement in the outbuilding. The next moment, he released a powerful cutting blade of wind at her. A desperate cry went up from the audience as the spell flew towards her. However, the girl herself remained completely calm. Without taking her concentrated gaze away, she quickly ducked and dodged the attack with surprising dexterity. Reg was visibly surprised and frowned in irritation when he saw how easily his sister had avoided his blow. Almost immediately, he went on the offensive again, unleashing a series of cutting air attacks on her. However, Diella continued to move around the arena, timing each jump and dodge perfectly. She carefully watched the trajectory of all attacks and unerringly avoided every blow. Derek noted that Reg was indeed proficient in first-star magic, but he clearly lacked real combat experience. Suddenly, one of the cutting blows crashed into the magical barrier, covering it with cracks. Then Diella stretched out her hand and instantly erected a huge wall of blue ice spikes in the middle of the arena. Reg immediately realized that she had only used pure mana, and not a full-fledged star-classified spell. The boy then gathered even more magical energy into his palms, intending to finish the fight with one blow. He was confident that he could easily destroy this defense with his strength, and challenged his sister to try to withstand the next attack. At that moment, Diella remembered her mentor's words about how mercenaries fought completely differently than nobles. For them, the only goal was always victory. At the time, the girl was worried that this style of fighting was very different from traditional duels and would certainly be condemned. However, Derek then asked if she really should have cared about other people's opinions if she achieved the victory she wanted. Without hesitation, Diella replied that she was ready to do whatever it took to win. Returning to the present, the girl looked resolutely at her brother, and anger flashed in her blue eyes. Meanwhile, Reg's devastating attack slammed into the ice wall with tremendous force, instantly shattering it into pieces. However, Diella ducked in advance, avoiding the blow, and remembered another piece of advice from her mentor. The most dangerous mercenaries defeated even stronger opponents. Such fighters participated not in duels, but in battles to the death. Reg was preparing a new attack, and the girl had already realized that victory could only be achieved by completely controlling the battlefield. Therefore, she took the most advantageous position. Diella intended to take advantage of even the slightest mistake by the enemy to counterattack. Another powerful gust of wind exploded in the middle of the arena. He scattered ice and debris from the stone arena in all directions. Despite the thick dust that enveloped the area, Diella continued to closely monitor the enemy's movements. Reg, confident in his superiority, grinned triumphantly, deciding that the outcome of the battle was already predetermined. From under her hood, the girl watched the rapidly approaching attack. A powerful blow fell directly on the spot where she had stood just a moment ago. After the collision, a huge cloud of smoke and dust rose above the arena. Derek watched the scene unfold as the spectators began to scream in alarm again. Duchess Muriella covered her mouth with her hand in horror, thinking her daughter had taken a direct hit. She demanded that the fight be stopped immediately before the girl was hurt even more. However, Duke Duplain ordered his wife to calm down and return to her place, explaining that the battle was not over yet. The woman objected indignantly, believing that everyone had seen the hit with their own eyes. Then the head of the family explained that Diella's protective necklace had still not worked, meaning the decisive blow had not yet reached its target. Meanwhile, the main character was still sitting on his bench. The Duke noticed his composure and realized that the mentor had expected such progress from his student from the very beginning. Meanwhile, Reg walked slowly through the destroyed arena, trying to see anything through the thick curtain of smoke. The boy was sure that his attack had hit the target, and he could not understand where his sister had managed to disappear to in such a short moment. Suddenly, Reg looked down and noticed with horror a huge hole that had formed right in the wooden floor of the arena. There was a cracking sound beneath his feet, and then he realized that the structure was about to collapse. The next moment, a giant blue ice spike shot out of the hole, forcing him to jump back. He managed to land safely and assume a defensive stance, but his heart was pounding wildly from surprise. Gritting his teeth, Rig realized that the attack had come from right underneath the platform he had just been standing on. The young nobleman then quickly looked at the butler, remembering that according to the rules, going outside the arena meant defeat. However, Delon only shook his head, indicating that the duel continued. Then Rig realized with irritation that going under the deck did not count as leaving the arena. At that moment, a chill ran down the young man's spine. He felt that his sister was still very close. Almost immediately, huge ice spikes began to emerge from the destroyed floor one after another. Rig had to constantly dodge and retreat to avoid being pierced by the sharp ice columns. He soon realized that without the ability to locate Diela, it was impossible to counterattack effectively. Moreover, the boy realized that one precise blow from his sister would be enough to trigger his protective artifact and automatically defeat him. In desperation, Rig shouted Diela's name out loud, trying to find her in the chaos. It was at that moment that the girl suddenly appeared from the darkness beneath the arena. From under the hood, his sister's fiery eyes looked at Rig, full of determination. Faced with that gaze, the young nobleman suddenly remembered where he had seen such a calm and frightening expression before. Derek had looked at him with exactly the same look before. Then Rig turned his eyes to his mentor and immediately realized that such a daring battle plan could only belong to a former mercenary. Feeling the real pressure, he decided to stop holding back. The guy unbuttoned his long battle cloak and with a sharp movement threw it aside, completely freeing his movements. Then he looked at the hole in the arena and prepared to play by the new rules that Derek had imposed on him. Meanwhile, Miriella was horrified to realize that Diela had voluntarily hidden under the destroyed wooden platform. She again began to beg her husband to immediately stop this madness, but the Duke replied that the rules had not been broken. The Duke himself thoughtfully rested his chin on his hand, watching with obvious interest every development of the unusual duel. Meanwhile, beneath the destroyed platform, Diela crouched down and hid among her own ice spikes. Concentrating, the girl realized that she was finally able to see exactly what was needed. Now she could clearly discern streams of magical energy moving freely around. Above, Rig prepared to cast a new spell, but suddenly felt a change in the flow of mana. Before he could utter a word, a huge ice spear appeared right under his feet. The boy jumped back and realized that his sister had deliberately attacked him at the very moment he began to cast the spell. Then Rig decided that he would not allow himself to be caught off guard again. Quickly thinking of a new strategy, he turned his attention to the flagpole holding the Duplan family banner in the center of the arena. At this time, Diela, who was hiding under the flooring, felt that the enemy's mana flow suddenly disappeared. She immediately suspected a trap, but was not afraid and decided to attack the moment she felt the spell begin again. Outside the arena, Delon watched the proceedings with alarm, worried about the young master. Unexpectedly, Rig, with astonishing agility, climbed to the top of the flagpole to gain a height advantage. Once at the top, he decided that from such a distance, Diela would no longer be able to react in time. Then he gathered all the remaining mana in his palm and decided to use the last option. Without chanting any spells, Rig released a powerful stream of pure magical energy, intending to destroy the arena. Derek watched this maneuver silently, his expression unchanged. The crushing blow instantly destroyed the platform's supports, and the entire wooden structure began to fall apart. The huge metal flagpole lost its support and fell down with a crash. However, Rig deftly pushed off the falling debris, and using it, managed to soften his landing. After the arena completely collapsed, a huge cloud of dust covered the training ground. Frightened, Miriella could not bear it and shouted out the name of her youngest son. As the dust began to clear, Rig emerged from the thick smoke, down on one knee and breathing heavily. Rig coughed slightly due to the thick dust, and then began to carefully examine the battlefield in search of his sister. Suddenly the boy noticed a swift silhouette that was quickly approaching him through a thick curtain of dust. Without wasting a second, he extended his hand forward and instantly created a bright blue magical arrow in front of him. After that, he fired it straight at the target with great speed. Diela carefully followed the trajectory of the flying projectile and did not show the slightest fear. Showing incredible reflexes, the girl dodged the arrow literally at the last moment. While still in mid-leap, she extended her hand, shrouded in a blue glow, forward, simultaneously preparing a counterattack. However, then she noticed something else. A magic arrow flew at her again, which she clearly did not expect. And yet the girl managed to dodge it, and the arrow flew past her head, barely touching her hair. Rig froze in place, amazed at the incredible speed with which his sister had managed to close the distance. However, in close combat, the advantage remained his, and he only needed to fire one more arrow to end the duel. But before he could do anything, Diela suddenly delivered a powerful kick straight to his chest, throwing him back. For a brief moment, their gazes met in the air, and the girl's eyes showed clear determination. At the same time, Rig's face was frozen in genuine shock. The young nobleman collapsed to the ground, clutching his chest and trying to catch his breath. However, Diela had no intention of giving him a second's respite. She instantly ducked, grabbed a handful of sand and earth, and then threw it right into her opponent's face. This completely ungentlemanly move temporarily blinded Reg. The boy cried out in pain and covered his eyes with his hands. While he was furiously shouting his sister's name, the girl took advantage of the moment and quickly climbed onto the pile of rubble. Then Reg finally realized that Diela had used all her available means, as she had already completely exhausted her mana reserves. Reg admitted that this duel had become a real test, which was supposed to prove Diela's worth as a mage. His pride was seriously hurt by his sister's dirty but effective methods, so he decided not to hold back any longer. Meanwhile, the bright sun continued to illuminate the arena. Diela stood motionless among the destroyed structures, watching as the enemy gradually came to his senses. Covered in bruises and scratches, the girl straightened her disheveled hair and tried to gather her last strength. At that moment, she remembered one of Derek's lessons. The protagonist then compared magic to painting a picture and explained that mana was like liquid paint and the spell was like the artist's brush. The secret was to gather the scattered mana around, like a brush gathers paint. Then you need to give this energy the correct form, creating a complete picture. Diela's mind flashed back to that starry night when she stood next to Derek. He demonstrated to her how to control the blue streams of mana that floated freely in the air. Then the guy explained that this was the true essence of magic. Returning to reality, the girl closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to accurately repeat all of the teacher's instructions. A huge aura of bright blue energy began to rapidly grow around her. Diela repeated Derek's words about mana being the paint and the spell being the brush. A moment later, she felt streams of energy at her fingertips with a clarity she had never experienced before. Then the girl, with a smooth movement, directed all the collected force into one point. Under the astonished gaze of everyone present on the ground, a magic circle flared up, and an ice spear appeared in front of Diela. Delon's eyes widened in shock at the sight of such an impressive spell. Miriella also froze in amazement, and told her husband that their youngest daughter had just successfully used the real magic of the first star. Even Reg couldn't hide his surprise when he realized that his sister had truly exceeded all expectations. Meanwhile, Diela continued to stand motionless in place, completely focused on controlling the huge ice spear. Reg wasn't going to give in either. The guy gathered the last remnants of wind magic in his palms. After that, he released a powerful stream of cutting arrows. He was confident that he still surpassed his sister in mastery of the magic of the first star, and that it would be his attack that would prove decisive. However, at Diela's command, the heavy ice spear rushed forward. At the same moment, a stream of Reg's air arrows rushed towards him. Two powerful spells from the first star collided right in the center of the destroyed arena, causing a blinding flash. Then a powerful explosion of magical energy followed, and a shockwave rolled across the entire training yard. Fearing for her daughter's safety, Miriella jumped up from her seat and shouted Diela's name. As the thick smoke completely covered the arena, a large yellowish protective barrier suddenly appeared around one of the participants. The magical shield flared brightly and completely absorbed the remaining destructive force of the mana explosion. Heavy, intermittent breathing could be heard among the gradually dispersing dust. Diela was barely able to stand on her feet, struggling to catch her breath, her face covered in bruises, and her strength was almost completely drained. Meanwhile, Derek kept his red eyes glued to the ruined arena, watching the outcome of the clash closely. The story then moves briefly back a year. We find ourselves again in the castle of the majestic residence of the Duplain family. Delon informed the owner that an important letter had arrived early in the morning concerning preparations for the upcoming social banquet. The servant then asked what should be done with the invitation for Diela, who at that time was sitting alone in her room without leaving. Then the little girl spent her days curled up on a chair by the window. She looked longingly at one point in front of her, feeling completely alone. The Duke only silently looked at his daughter from afar, feeling guilty because he did not know how to help her. Now, in the present time, in the arena, Diela slowly raised her head, covered in dust and wounds. The girl soon realized that she was right in the center of the spherical protective barrier that had saved her from Reg's last attack. Realizing this, she realized that it was her protective amulet that had been activated. Meanwhile, on the other side of the destroyed arena, Reg was still kneeling, his barrier not activated. Derek only looked away slightly and silently acknowledged that his student had lost the decisive duel after all. Unable to contain the disappointment that was overwhelming her, Diela burst into tears right there in the rubble of the arena. From the balcony, Duke Duplain watched silently, but Mirielle was furious. She sharply reproached her husband, saying that she considered such a cruel and crude magical duel to be completely unacceptable. While the woman continued to loudly protest, Diela silently wiped away her tears, still unable to cope with the defeat. Miriella indignantly declared that a mere commoner dared to teach their daughter such dirty fighting techniques. These words unexpectedly reminded the Duke of his own youth, and the memories transported him to the war years. Then the experienced general noted that he had already heard a lot of good things about him thanks to his father. The veteran also noticed that the young heir had the same firm and determined look as his parent. Returning his thoughts to the present, the Duke looked at his daughter, who continued to cry, wiping away her incessant tears. Despite the defeat, the man noted to himself that Diela's determination and gaze had changed. Meanwhile, one of the maids hurried to the girl and tried to make sure that she was okay. Soon other servants came running, insisting that the girl must be taken immediately to a doctor. However, overcome with the bitterness of defeat, Diela abruptly pushed the maid's hand away. Ignoring their concern, she slowly walked towards Reg, who was standing nearby. The guy met his sister with a tense look. He was noticeably nervous, not knowing what to say. Scratching the back of his head awkwardly, Reg still said that she fought well during the duel. Meanwhile, the maids again cautiously approached and offered to escort the mistress back to her chambers. However, the girl silently walked past them, without even looking in their direction. Instead, she headed towards Derek, who was still sitting on the wooden bench at the edge of the arena. The protagonist looked up and met the student with his usual calm expression. Diela lowered her head and tried her best to hide her tears. However, she could no longer contain her emotions. She covered her face with her hands and then clutched the fabric of her red dress tightly. Through her tears, the girl confessed to her mentor that she had lost the fight after all and asked him to forgive her for it. Derek looked at his student in silence for a few seconds. Then the guy slowly rose from the bench and said that there was nothing terrible about what happened. Afterwards, he put his hand on her shoulder and explained that sometimes it was perfectly okay to lose. The hero advised using all the accumulated pain and frustration as a source of strength in order to become even stronger in the future. These words touched Diela deeply. Unable to bear it any longer, the girl finally burst into tears, now not only from despair, but also from relief. From a distance, the maids watched their mistress with concern, discussing her emotional state. At that moment, quick footsteps were heard. Miriella ran out into the yard, hurrying towards her daughter with an expression of genuine concern on her face. Mirielle knelt before her daughter, regretting that the girl had to endure such a grueling ordeal. Then the woman tried to calm Diela down, saying that everything would be fine now, and told her to go to the healers as soon as possible. Continuing to cry and hugging her mother around the neck, the girl obediently nodded and allowed the maids to lead her away. Miriel watched for a long time as her daughter was escorted back to the palace. After that, she wiped away her own tears with a handkerchief. Meanwhile, Derek, having decided that he had accomplished his task, turned around and headed towards the exit of the training arena. However, the mistress of the house quickly crossed the yard and quickly approached the young man. Noticing her approach, the protagonist turned his head questioningly. Muriel was furious and declared that a commoner had no right to teach her daughter magic using such crude and unworthy methods. She gave him a hard slap, and a bright red mark immediately appeared on the young man's cheek. The woman continued to reproach him, claiming that he had taught Diela only cheap tricks and thus tarnished her honor. Blinded by anger, she slapped her mentor again. Miriella then declared that such an insignificant commoner could never understand that the nobles had sacred values. After this, she pointed to her husband, who had approached her, and demanded that he immediately take action against what was happening. However, the woman didn't have time to finish. Her eyes widened in shock. Her husband Raymond suddenly slapped her in the face. Holding her burning cheek, Muriel asked why he had done such a thing, reminding him that Derek was just a commoner. The Duke replied that this was indeed the case, but the boy was also their daughter's official tutor. He then asked what father or mother would allow themselves to treat their own child's teacher in such a humiliating manner. Raymond turned to Derek and apologized for his wife's behavior, explaining that everyone has their own way of showing love to their children. The protagonist looked at the Duke, but he showed neither offense nor irritation. The guy then bowed respectfully and said that he held no grudge, after which Raymond invited him to come into the office for a talk. The Duke and Derek left the training yard together and headed for the palace, leaving Muriel completely alone. The Duchess stood motionless on the lawn, pressing her palm to her cheek. Once in the office, Raymond praised his mentor, admitting that he had done an excellent job of training Diela. The Duke stated that as ruler of these lands, he was obliged to reward the teacher, reminding him of the limits usually available to commoners. The man then asked if Derek wanted the opportunity to learn the magic of the third star in exchange for continuing his daughter's education. Upon hearing this proposal, the boy immediately realized that the Duke had touched his deepest desire. He pondered for a while, amazed at the insight of the ruler, who seemed to understand his aspirations even better than he did. Realizing that such a chance would only come once, Derek looked at the Grand Duke and agreed. Raymond noted that he had trained Diela well, but that this level was not enough for her to survive among the nobility of Ebelstein. Derek said that now that the girl had learned to sense mana, there would be many teachers in the palace who could teach her. However, the Duke explained that from now on his daughter needed not just a spell teacher, but a real mentor. He noticed that, being a commoner, he cherished such grandiose ambitions that the law did not allow him to even dream of such a thing. Raymond added that he was well aware how much such insolence would offend most of the nobles. However, he was ready to turn a blind eye to this in Derek's case, and the hero was surprised to realize that the Duke had figured out his true goal. Raymond was well aware that his dreams were not limited to studying the magic of the third star. He was striving to reach the fourth. The head of the house then asked directly whether the young mentor was planning to leave the estate anytime soon. Derek frankly confirmed that he did indeed intend to leave. However, Raymond insisted that he continue to train Diela for some time. While the boy was pondering the Duke's words about the limits of Commoner's power, the ruler proposed the final terms of the agreement. In exchange for continuing Diela's training, Derek received full access to books on the magic of the third star. Without a second's hesitation, the young man confirmed that he wanted to gain this invaluable knowledge. Sometime later, the doors of the palace's secret archives swung open. Derek walked calmly along the quiet corridors, past endless shelves of ancient books. Then the hero curiously reached out and took a heavy book in a red leather binding from a dusty shelf. Carefully opening it, the guy began to carefully leaf through the pages filled with ancient runes and diagrams of magic circles. He studied the smallest details of the spells with concentration. Derek soon admitted that the contents were truly impressive. He thought about how countless mages had dedicated their entire lives to trying to obtain even one grimoire with 2-star magic. However, looking around, he noticed that this entire section consisted of valuable manuals on 3-star magic. Then the guy realized that he now had more than enough reasons to stay in this estate. However, he noted that Pelin would probably cause chaos if she found out about this. Several calm days have passed since then. Diela put her hands on her hips and smugly declared that she was now officially a 1-star mage. Derek noted that since the girl had managed to use the magic of 1-star at least once, then formally she could be called that. Hearing such a restrained reaction, she stated that the mentor should have been more pleased with his student's success. Then she snorted in irritation and scratched the back of her head, and the hero noticed that she had recovered very well over the last 3 days. After this, the guy, with a slight mockery, reminded her that after the last fight, the girl looked like a real crybaby. Diela instantly blushed, crossed her arms angrily, and began loudly denying it, insisting that she had simply gotten dust in her eyes. Then the girl puffed out her cheeks in displeasure and complained that her father should have warned her about the family's plans in advance. However, he suggested that she continue her studies, explaining that very soon she would master the remaining spells of 1-star. Hearing this, Diela instantly perked up and, with shining eyes, asked what exactly she would study next. The hero explained that her development was rapid, as soon after mastering mana control, she was able to use the magic of 1-star. These words visibly flattered the girl, and she asked what powerful move they would start today's training with. However, Derek immediately destroyed her expectations by informing her that the lesson would be devoted exclusively to the manifestation of pure mana. Diela asked in disappointment why they had to go back to the basics again, instead of learning new spells. Then the hero explained that it was precisely the perfect mastery of the fundamental principles that defined a true magician. He was about to tell her in detail about the structure of mana, but the girl looked downcast and reluctantly agreed. At the same time, she said with displeasure that she had been overjoyed in vain, expecting to immediately move on to more destructive spells of 1-star. In conclusion, she demonstratively puffed out her cheeks and threw an angry look at the teacher. Noticing the expression on her mentor's face, Diela asked suspiciously why he was looking at her like that and whether her face was dirty. The guy thoughtfully propped his chin on his hand and replied that he was only surprised at how obediently she followed his instructions. The girl turned away in irritation and grumbled that she had always obeyed him from the very beginning. But these words made Derek remember completely different events. Then he reminded the student that she had poured dirty water on his head twice in a row. Diela said sheepishly, surprised that he still remembered it, and the hero noted that it was quite difficult to forget something like that. Trying to change the subject as quickly as possible, the girl said that the weather was great today and hurried back to training. The hero only chuckled slightly, watching her desperate attempt to avoid continuing the conversation. Time passed quickly, and soon night fell upon the city. Diela lay on the lawn, completely exhausted and breathing heavily, and blue mana still flickered around her body. Derek approached the student and informed her that her daily routine was about to become much more intense. The girl sat up and wearily noticed that the mentor had already learned of the family's decision. Then she rubbed her head tiredly and explained that she had to start classes starting the following week. The hero tried to look at the situation from the other side and noted that this was a good sign because she had already mastered the magic of 1-star. However, Diela objected with displeasure, saying that she was not at all happy about such a prospect. Derek explained that it was through these trials that Iselin became one of the most prominent representatives of high society in the region. The girl admitted that what she wanted most was to continue studying magic, and Derek assured her that she could study as much as she wanted. The hero then noted that after everything that had happened, it was unlikely that there would be a person capable of simply throwing him out of the estate. Diela warned that her father might have already accepted him, but her mother was not one to change her mind so easily. She explained that her mother was afraid that taking lessons from a commoner would deprive her of her noble dignity and turn her into a mercenary. Even that duel was considered extremely unworthy and not in keeping with the norms of aristocrats in the family. After this, the hero remarked that solving such a problem would not be difficult at all, which noticeably puzzled the student. He explained that it was easy to silence the Duchess. It was enough to deprive her of the only reason for complaint. Diela looked at the teacher, still not understanding what exactly he had in mind. Soon morning came, and the singing of birds filled the Duplain family palace. Muriella walked slowly through the luxurious corridors with a thoughtful and worried expression on her face. She was saddened that her daughter had to study with such a rude teacher who came from the street. She imagined that the guy was teaching Diela the brutal techniques of mercenaries, holding the tied-up prisoner right on the floor. Then she saw her daughter burst into the ballroom with a boar on her shoulders, terrifying all the noble ladies. Muriella even got a headache from such fantasies. She hastened to pull herself together and again assumed the majestic posture of the mistress of the house. Muriella was determined that, despite her husband's support, she would still find a way to get rid of this teacher. Suddenly, Diela appeared in the hallway and called out to her mother, interrupting her thoughts. The Duchess instantly changed her expression to a gentle smile. She opened her arms, remembering how her daughter had always joyfully rushed to meet her. However, this time nothing like that happened. Instead, the girl bowed gracefully and very formally, politely inquiring whether her mother had had a good night. Muriella's eyes widened, and she literally froze in surprise. The girl then apologized for not being able to come earlier due to her injuries and said that she was already rushing to her morning piano lesson. The woman was still trying to comprehend such a drastic change and was barely able to answer anything. Meanwhile, Diela walked past with a slight smile, warning that she was in a hurry due to a busy class schedule. Muriella asked if the etiquette lessons had already started, since they were supposed to start only next week. The girl confirmed that classes began in a week and thanked her mother for her concern. The Duchess could only agree and advise her daughter to hurry so as not to be late. As Diela walked through the courtyard, one of the maids accidentally dropped some wooden planks. However, instead of her usual anger, Diela approached the maid with a kind smile and gently asked if she was hurt. The maid froze in astonishment and could only respond with a noticeable stutter. Muriella, who was watching what was happening from afar, was truly shocked. Meanwhile, we find ourselves in the noble quarter of Ebelstein. One of the noblewomen remarked that she had been very worried about Lady Aislinn at the last meeting, as she had seemed unusually anxious. A surprised Aislinn covered her mouth with her hand and apologized for unwittingly causing her friends to worry. She then explained with relief that most of her problems had already been resolved, so she now felt calmer. Alente from the Belmiard house admitted that she had previously been frightened by rumors that her friend had left the neighborhood to save someone. Aislinn thanked her for her concern and explained that she was simply looking for a worthy teacher for her sister. Alente wondered what kind of master he must have been if Aislinn herself had to personally search for him on the streets. Denise from the Veltus house was also surprised to learn that such a long search was carried out for the sake of little Diela. Aislinn said that she had changed so much and turned into a real lady that at first it was almost impossible to recognize her. Diela had already managed to use the magic of 1 star, and her impeccable manners and posture greatly impressed those around her. Denise found this attitude very strange, since Saint-Duplan had previously carefully hidden his youngest daughter from strangers. Aislinn added that the teacher was a commoner without status, and the trip to the mercenaries was completely worth it. As soon as the word mercenary was mentioned, Denise and Alente literally froze in shock. Alente remembered Diela's terrible reputation. The girl was so unbearable that she once even forced the family's head chef to flee the mansion in despair. This teacher was a miracle worker, since he managed to not only tame her, but also turn her into a 1-star mage. After this, a slight smile appeared on Alente's face. Then she decided to get straight to the point and asked the name of the mysterious mentor who had managed to achieve such a result. She noted that, having become Diela's teacher, the boy would certainly become famous in the future, so she wanted to know his name. Aislinn proudly announced that his name was Derek. Meanwhile, Diela explained that Derek had been teaching her the rules of etiquette, as it had proven too difficult to master them on her own. Muriella smiled tensely and, hesitantly, tried to praise her daughter's desire to learn. However, the girl immediately emphasized that she owed all her success solely to the precise instructions of her teacher. With a beaming smile, she added that she hadn't understood much of it before, but thanks to Derek, she had finally figured out how to behave. Muriel kept a friendly expression on her face, but his name sounded in her head over and over again, like torture. Irritated by the constant references to the commoner, the Duchess vowed that she would not let this situation go unanswered. She didn't understand how the young man had managed to influence Diela so much, but she decided to find a way to change everything. Meanwhile, in the garden, the maid was telling how Lady Diela had recently begun to treat all the servants with extraordinary kindness. The gardener fully agreed, noting how much the girl's behavior had changed in just a few weeks. Even Delon admitted that he had previously seen such impeccable manners only in the family's eldest daughter. However, all this sincere praise from all the palace workers only fueled Muriel's irritation even more. Some time passed from that moment, and soon night fell on the city. On the grass of the secret garden, right in front of the hero, lay an open 3-star book of magic. Derek trained alone, his face covered in sweat and his gaze intensely focused. The hero stretched his hand forward and concentrated magical energy with incredible precision. Gritting his teeth, he tried his best to keep the flow of mana under control. A bluish energy furiously enveloped his fingers. Having completed the grueling exercise, the hero sank down onto the grass, exhausted, and caught his breath heavily. Suddenly, a rustling of leaves was heard in the darkness, followed by a polite apology from behind the trees. Reg emerged from the shadows with a friendly smile and asked if he had accidentally disturbed the young mentor's night training. Derek replied that there were no problems, and then asked himself what brought him here at such a late hour. They settled down on a large fallen tree trunk to talk. Reg admitted that he wanted to talk frankly about his younger sister Dila, and the hero nodded understandingly. However, before moving on to the main topic, the nobleman's gaze stopped on a book with a red cover. He asked if it was indeed a 3-star grimoire, and Derek confirmed that the Duke had lent him the book. Derek explained that while 3-star magic was still too difficult for him, it never hurt to study the material. After this, the nobleman remembered a recent conversation with his father, who had stated that Derek was a magician worthy of respect. Reg acknowledged the truth of these words and noted that the young man's diligence was indeed impressive. Finally, the hero asked again what exactly the firstborn wanted to discuss about Diela, only then did Reg remember his real goal. His cheeks instantly flushed with embarrassment, and he stammered as he asked what kind of gifts teenage girls usually liked. Derek looked at the young man in surprise after such an unexpected question. Reg became even more embarrassed and hesitantly asked if his sister would like a rag doll if he sewed it with his own hands. The mentor immediately presented a creepy, very strange-looking doll that Valerian had made earlier. Then he replied that Diela would certainly not appreciate such a gift. The disappointed guy tried to hide his embarrassment. He admitted that he himself understood how unsuccessful this idea was. Then, wanting to quickly change the subject, Reg scratched the back of his head and suggested returning to the palace, since the training was already over. Together, they walked across the lawn to the main doors of the mansion. On the way, the nobleman sincerely thanked Derek for everything he had done for his family. The young man said that in recent days, the atmosphere in the entire estate had noticeably changed for the better, and the Duke was pleased with the family's new life. The hero remarked that his feelings were very difficult to understand, and Reg replied that absolutely everyone would surely agree with that. Suddenly, the young man stopped right in the middle of the lawn. Looking up at the starry sky, he noticed that people had indeed changed a lot, especially children around his younger sister's age. Reg admitted that he still didn't understand whether he noticed what was happening too late or whether he simply didn't want to see the truth. After this, he turned to the hero and thanked him, emphasizing that everything that had happened was only possible thanks to his efforts. Derek merely nodded curtly in respect. As they continued on their way, Reg noticed that his sister's magic looked unusual and resembled freehand painting. The hero was amazed by the guy's observation, because most people would never notice such a subtle difference. He then confirmed his guess and explained that Diela had used the Wild School's method to control the flow of mana. Once a girl has fully mastered the basics, she will be able to develop independently, no longer needing a mentor. Moreover, at this level, the intervention of any teacher is more likely to hinder than help. Reg listened carefully to the explanation and silently thought, imagining the day when his sister would finally reach her full potential. 2 more months passed since that day. Diela asked why the maid brought so many flowers. The girl explained that she had collected them in the garden to decorate her mistress's hair. Smelling the pleasant scent of the petals, Diela remarked that it felt as if spring reigned here all year round. Then she thought about how she could now easily wield 1-star magic, and her relationship with the servants had become much warmer. The girl happily realized how many wonderful moments she had missed out on before, and thanked her mentor Derek for all of this. The maid jokingly remarked that now she understood why her mistress was so happy today. While she was weaving flowers into the girl's hair, Diela asked her to leave 1 extra petal to give to her teacher. Suddenly, the flower branch slipped from her hands and fell onto the luxurious floor of the palace corridor. She wanted to give it to Derek, but the unexpected news completely stunned her. Diela froze in place, her eyes full of tears as she looked into one of the rooms. With a trembling voice, the girl asked if it really meant what she had just heard. Derek and Valerian stood silently in the room. Then her mentor confirmed that, unfortunately, he could no longer teach her anything. Just as the seasons inevitably changed, happy periods of life also eventually came to an end. During his previous conversation with the Duke, the hero explained that Diela had an exceptional talent in the direction of wild nature. He noted that further interference in her education would only limit his students' development. Raymond accepted his mentor's explanation and admitted that he really no longer had any reasons to remain in the estate. For some time, the head of the family silently considered the decision he had made. Then the Duke rose from his desk and admitted that much had changed for the better. Thanks to Derek's efforts, his daughter was finally able to truly grow up. Raymond admitted that he had previously been too busy managing his estates and therefore had not been able to become a good father. Without turning to his interlocutor, the nobleman asked when the guy was going to leave the palace. Derek replied that he planned to use Iselin's carriage and return to the outskirts of Ebelstein after her visit was over. The Duke accepted this decision and asked for the return of the key to the family secret archive, and the hero nodded in agreement. However, the Duke suddenly stopped him and demanded that he hand over the special key immediately. The hero silently looked at the man with surprise and suspicion, not understanding such a strange haste. However, he only turned to the window and stated that if there was nothing more to discuss, the guy could leave the office. Without saying another word in farewell, Derek maintained his usual calm expression. He bowed respectfully and then slowly walked towards the exit. Soon the hero was leisurely walking along the long corridor of the palace. Suddenly, Diela blocked his way and complained that he had unexpectedly appeared in her life and was now just as suddenly going to disappear. Derek looked at the student seriously and addressed her by name. He then explained that there was no other way out, although the hero understood that she most likely did not want to hear it. With tears in her eyes, Diela asked pleadingly if he really couldn't stay at the estate. Hearing such a sincere request, the guy fell silent for a moment and looked away. Then he took several confident steps towards the girl. He said that he was going to return to his former life as a mercenary to continue studying magic. Besides, as soon as she had honed her abilities sufficiently, she was to come to Ebelstein for her debut ball. Derek promised that they would meet again, and if her level increased, he would be able to teach her completely new techniques. The girl tried to hide her tears, turned away angrily, and grumbled that the teacher was a terribly annoying person. She admitted with annoyance that he always found exactly the right words to say in the most difficult moments. Later that night, Diela lay in her bed, breathing heavily in her sleep and her face covered in cold sweat. The girl was again tormented by a terrible nightmare, filled with ominous voices that called her untalented. The voices kept repeating that she was the greatest disgrace of the Duplan family and should never have been born. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes wide. The next moment, Diela woke up screaming in her bed. The frightened girl was breathing heavily, huddled under the blanket, and trying to come to her senses. Touching her head, she realized with relief that it was just another nightmare. Hearing the scream, the maid quickly opened the bedroom door and anxiously asked if everything was all right with her mistress. Diela looked at her silently as the girl explained that she heard a loud scream and was very scared. At that moment, a thought arose in Diela's head. She began to think about how to stop her teacher from leaving. The girl even thought about returning to her previous behavior and causing trouble for everyone again. She felt that if she became uncontrollable again, Derek would be forced to stay at the estate and continue to help her. Noticing the mistress's prolonged silence, the maid came closer and asked her solicitously how she felt. At that moment, Diela bit her lip hard. Then she finally cast aside her selfish thoughts and decided never to behave so cruelly and childishly again. Then the girl smiled and came to the conclusion that capricious behavior would never make her a person worthy of respect. Soon the next morning arrived. Sitting in the carriage, Iselin offered to give the hero a ride to the city's shopping district, and Derek politely thanked her. With a friendly smile, the girl advised him to take advantage of the last minutes to say goodbye to everyone. Taking a deep breath, the hero prepared himself for the inevitable farewell. The family members and chief servants gathered in the courtyard. Valerian was the first to break the silence. He asked if the mentor really needed to leave now. Reg admitted that life on the estate had been quite difficult for his mentor, but then he thanked him for his enormous efforts. Derek bowed respectfully and sincerely thanked him for his support and generosity. Then he turned his gaze to the man who had been most distressed by his departure. Diela stood with her arms crossed over her chest and a displeased expression on her face. Noticing the teacher's intense gaze, the girl irritably asked why he was looking at her like that. She then told him not to even count on asking him to stay, because now she was no longer a helpless little girl. Derek admitted that it was a great honor for him to become her mentor. In response, Diela smiled and joked that she would definitely tell everyone who her teacher was. According to her, the mentor's peaceful life ended the moment he agreed to teach the heiress of the Duplan family. Diela stammered sheepishly as she asked Derek to be careful on the streets and not to get injured during dangerous missions. In response, the hero asked her not to overwork herself during her studies. Diela, however, stated that she already considered herself an adult, capable of handling everything perfectly well on her own. Derek looked at the girl in silence for a few seconds, her words unexpectedly awakening memories of his own childhood. Then he tried to convince those around him of his independence in the same way. Hearing this, Katya hugged the boy tightly with motherly care. She stroked his head tenderly and asked him to always keep her advice in his heart. Returning to reality, the hero looked at his student with compassion. Then he quietly said her name one last time before leaving. The guy carefully stroked Diela's head and gently advised her not to rush into becoming an adult because everything has its time. Hearing these words, the girl again felt her eyes fill with tears. As soon as Derek turned away and headed towards the carriage, Diela quickly wiped her face, trying to hide her tears. However, a moment later, the guy stopped, hearing her loudly call out his name. Despite her tears, the girl smiled broadly, waved happily at him, and promised that they would definitely meet again. The hero responded with only a slight bow and farewell, and expressed the hope of seeing her again one day, on the outskirts of Ebelstein. Deeply moved, Diela agreed to this promise. This is where their learning history came to an end. Meanwhile, the action moved to the shopping district of Ebelstein. Suddenly, the door of one of the local taverns swung open with a bang. Inside, Pelin delivered a powerful punch to the overconfident man's face, quickly putting him in his place. The crowd around cheered on the participants in the brawl, and Derek watched from the sidelines, hiding under a black cloak. The blonde was already about to finish off her defeated enemy. However, she suddenly looked up and noticed her friend in front of her, then the girl immediately stopped. Derek smiled sincerely and announced that he had finally returned to his real home. A little time passed from that moment, and soon a new day arrived. Jaden placed a glass of honey wine in front of Derek and jokingly remarked that this was exactly the kind of drink that the nobility usually despised. Pelin looked at her comrade and asked if he had always been so pale or if he had become even paler after living among the aristocrats. Jaden joined in the joke and admitted that, upon learning of the young man's appointment, he thought the nobles had completely lost their minds. Derek briefly explained that he had simply been working a lot on the estate and nothing particularly interesting had happened during that time. This answer clearly did not satisfy Pelin. The girl grumbled with displeasure that her friend was now speaking almost like a real aristocrat. Jaden tried to calm her down by handing her a mug of drink, but the blonde continued to grumble. Then the captain smiled slyly and suggested that service with the nobility must have brought Derek a huge amount of money. The hero replied that he had received something much more valuable than any money. After that, he took out from his bag an ancient grimoire in a red leather binding with gold decorations. Jaden and Pelin stared at the book in shock and assumed that it was a 2-star magic textbook. However, Derek corrected his friends and said that it was a legendary 3-star grimoire. Hearing this, both mercenaries instantly panicked. They started shouting and demanding to know if he had stolen such a valuable book. But the guy's expression didn't even change. He explained that the Duke had personally given him this grimoire as a reward. Pelin immediately grabbed her friend by the collar, wondering if the palace needed an archery instructor. The boys spent the whole day talking, and soon night came. Derek asked Jaden if there were any new quests, and the captain, who was sweeping the tavern floor, looked at him in surprise. The hero admitted that he wanted to take on a simple mission. After a quiet life in the palace, he felt that he had lost some of his fighting skills. Jaden assured him that such masters never lost their form, and besides, there was a constant shortage of good mercenary mages. Then Derek asked to be sent on a new mission the very next day. The next morning, 2 mercenaries set off in a cart to the next hunting ground. Soon Pelin was running away from the huge 2-legged monster at full speed. Thanks to her well-aimed arrows and Derek's sword, the giant monster soon fell to the ground. The partners then continued to explore the dangerous forest, destroying giant spiders along the way. By evening, Pelin was completely exhausted and lay powerless in the cart. Later, they set up camp in the forest near a crackling fire. When the blonde fell fast asleep, Derek quietly walked away from the parking lot, went out into a small clearing, and began training again. Derek controlled the bluish energy that enveloped his hands with incredible precision. Bright sparks began to flash between the fingers of his gloves as the hero attempted to form a powerful magical sphere. However, suddenly there was a powerful explosion, which threw the young man back with great force. A huge beam of magical light cut through the treetops, and with a deafening roar, alarmed the entire dark forest. Derek fell to the grass, trying to catch his breath, noticing that his left arm had received a small wound. The guy admitted that the gap between 2- and 3-star magic was truly enormous, and it was incredibly difficult to overcome. Meanwhile, the months continued to pass. Autumn soon arrived, covering the roofs of the houses with leaves. Soon, a harsh winter arrived, covering the entire region with a thick layer of snow. One winter day, the tavern door slowly opened, letting snowflakes in. Pelin walked inside, shivering and complaining about the biting cold, while Derek walked silently beside her. Seeing that they had just returned from a mission in the snowy mountains, Jaden smiled and remarked that it was good to be young. He added that only they could have been so reckless as to go after the harpy's head during such a snowstorm. Taking the towel, the boy politely thanked the owner and wiped his face, while Pelin enjoyed the warmth. Jaden warned that while they deserved a break, he had just received an order that was perfect for Derek. The captain explained that the task was simple and well paid, although the client might require a lot of patience. After this, he asked the hero if he had heard about the influential family of Count Belmiard. Jaden explained that the family was looking for a partner for magical training for one of their heirs. The purpose of the recruitment was to provide the girl with the opportunity to practice combat techniques without restrictions. Derek immediately agreed and set off for the majestic estate of House Belmiard. There, Elente was already waiting for him, currently strolling through the park with an elderly man. She asked who she would be fighting today, and the man said they had agreed on a commoner. Elente was surprised and asked him again if she really had to beat up some commoner. The man explained that this was also part of her training, and they promised him decent compensation so she could have fun. However, the girl said that the nobles were simply incredible if they considered beating a commoner to death a practice. And, although the commoner possessed first-star magic, Elente was sure that the difference between them would be colossal. Meanwhile, the hero was already waiting for his new student on the training bench. Suddenly, he heard someone's footsteps and raised his head. Elente looked the mercenary over carefully, assessing the man who had been hired as her sparring partner. Derek himself showed no sign of excitement and calmly greeted her and introduced himself by name. The girl gave her name, Elente, but it seemed to her that she had heard this name many times before, although she could not remember exactly. Elente wondered if it was really a magician standing in front of her, because he looked too young. Once in the arena, Elente straightened up and looked closely at her opponent. She asked if the young man knew the basic rules of magical sparring. The hero replied that he was familiar with the basic rules. Hearing this, the girl told him to resist with all his might, and she tried to end the fight as quickly as possible. However, Elente mentally decided that she would simply knock him out of the arena with a shockwave and end the fight immediately. Meanwhile, Derek clarified what exactly she meant by resisting with all her might. This question visibly puzzled Elente, and she asked with displeasure what this even meant. The hero then explained that it was important for him to understand how much resistance he had to put up in order for the sparring to be useful. An elderly teacher standing nearby silently watched their conversation. Elente only smiled slightly at this unusual manner of communication. Then she shook her head and repeated that Derek should fight with all his strength. Hearing these words, the young man chuckled, and at that very moment, magical energy began to slowly build up around him. Having accepted her conditions, he briefly replied that he would fulfill her request, and blue mana gradually gathered in his palm. Elente was the first to begin casting the spell. She did not deny that the simple youth possessed a rare talent. Reaching the level of a one-star mage at such an age was not easy, but his confidence already bordered on arrogance. Elente believed that he did not understand the huge gap between the nobles and the commoners, so she decided to remind him of it. Having finished the spell, she released a magical wave forward in one motion, which quickly rushed towards Derek. However, the hero reacted instantly. Without panic, he easily shifted to the side and took a step back, dodging the attack with precision. The spell flew past and crashed with monstrous force into the trees behind the arena. Elente narrowed her eyes in disbelief. The ease with which the young man had avoided her blow seemed almost mocking to her. Derek himself calmly watched her, waiting for his opponent's next move. It was this unperturbed calm that finally drove the girl crazy, and she decided to force him to admit the difference between them. Without wasting a second, Elente began to chant the spell again, and several magic circles flared up under her feet. Countless ice arrows began to form from them. When the spell was complete, the girl sent a real icy flurry at Derek. Hundreds of shells rushed towards him from all sides at once, leaving virtually no opportunity to dodge. But even then, the young man did not flinch. He just calmly raised his hand and used the most ordinary basic spell. The next moment, Elente's eyes widened in astonishment. Derek's simple spell easily destroyed every ice arrow before they could even get close. For several seconds, the girl stared motionless at what was happening, unable to comprehend what she saw. She understood that such impeccable control over magic was impossible without exceptional skill. An elderly man watched the fight from afar and thought that the rumors about Derek were completely true. Finally, Elente admitted that she had underestimated her opponent and then began casting a much more powerful spell. Determined to win at all costs, the girl created several flaming spears around herself, intending to fight seriously. Derek immediately noticed the change in her tactics and realized that she was now planning to destroy the entire arena and not just attack him. The guy praised his rival for her quick adaptation while she was preparing a rain of golden spears. Soon the heiress raised her hand and dozens of shining projectiles fell from the sky like a firestorm. Despite such a devastating attack, the hero remained standing calmly in the middle of the battlefield. He understood perfectly well that it was impossible to dodge so many blows at once. Therefore, at the last moment, he created a bluish barrier of mana in front of himself. As the fiery spears collided with the defenses, a series of deafening explosions rolled across the arena. Elente was sure that this would be enough to bring this commoner down from the skies. Smoke and dust enveloped everything around, completely hiding Derek's figure. However, when the cloud began to disperse, the young mercenary emerged from it completely unharmed and prepared for his next move. Suddenly, the hero's eyes widened, noticing the sudden attack. Taking advantage of the smokescreen, Elente quickly closed the distance and tried to pierce him with a sharp ice spear. Derek realized that his opponent was too close and he no longer had time to dodge or put up a barrier. Impressed by her incredible talent, the boy activated another technique with a quick movement of his fingers. An extremely bright spell of light flashed before them. Blinded by the flash, Elente quickly covered her eyes with her hands to avoid going blind. Having lost her bearings, the girl staggered and stepped back, trying to regain her balance. Her vision was completely impaired. Therefore, Elente tried to determine the enemy's location, relying solely on the sound of his footsteps. Just then, a magic projectile flew past her face. The girl panicked when she realized that she had heard absolutely no sound. She had no idea that Derek was slowly approaching her, surrounded by floating magical spheres. The hero moved almost silently, while simultaneously preparing another silent spell. The next shot again passed very close to Elente's head, causing her to tense up even more. Then the girl realized that he had used illusion magic to hide sounds and had foreseen her attempt to rely on hearing. At that moment, Elente realized that the first silent shot had deliberately missed its target. The girl felt insulted, realizing that Derek had not fought at full strength from the very beginning. Meanwhile, the guy released another magical charge. Elente managed to dodge in time, but continued to remain extremely cautious. Suddenly, the girl's eyes widened, noticing the enemy's incredible speed of movement. Derek quickly began to close the distance between them. Elente smiled, deciding that he had made a mistake, since quickly casting spells was her greatest strength. She concentrated, hoping to attack before the guy finished his spell. However, something unexpected happened. The main character was in no hurry to use his spell. Instead, Derek suddenly planted his foot hard on the ground. Elente jumped back. She couldn't understand why he used such an unusual maneuver right in the middle of a magical battle. It was then that she noticed a bright electrical discharge flashing across the toes of his boots. The girl froze in shock, realizing that Derek was able to release magic directly through his legs. The next moment, the electric shock hit its target. Despite her attempt to defend herself, Elente screamed and the powerful blow sent her flying backwards. The elderly man was genuinely amazed that the young mercenary's techniques clearly belonged to the school of wild nature. They were impossible to predict for those accustomed to following the classical school of magic. Falling to the ground and breathing heavily, Elente looked at Derek for a long time, unable to believe everything that had happened. Then the girl looked at him in a friendly manner and admitted that he really turned out to be a very interesting young man. Finally, she honestly admitted that she had greatly underestimated him at the very beginning of the fight. Moreover, she frankly admitted that at first she considered him nothing more than a boastful liar. After the fight ended, Derek and Elente were left standing face to face in the arena. The girl put her hand on her chest and admitted that the guy taught her a very valuable lesson that day. Then she smiled and thanked the hero for this combat experience. Literally the next moment, Elente repeated his skill, leaned against the arena, and directed magic through her legs. Derek instantly became serious and prepared for another confrontation. Lightning spread across the ground with incredible speed at the moment of the decisive attack. Elente fired a bolt of lightning towards the protagonist, hoping that he did not expect such a sudden attack. However, before she could finish, the hero appeared literally in front of her, preparing to strike her in a jump. Since she herself asked him to fight with all his strength, Derek decided to show her everything he could do. Then the girl finally realized that she had never before encountered a mage with such a wild and unpredictable fighting style. Suddenly, a loud bell ringing echoed throughout the training yard, bringing everyone back to reality. The elderly, bespectacled instructor shook the golden bell several times, officially declaring the training session over. After this, Elente lowered her fighting stance, making sure that the time for the duel had indeed expired. Derek bowed politely and thanked his opponent for the opportunity to have this fight. The red-haired girl was silent for a moment, thinking about everything that happened in the arena. Later, Elente praised the young man, noting that he turned out to be a magnificent magician. However, the hero immediately responded with mutual praise, particularly highlighting her outstanding reflexes. The girl noticed that despite his commoner origins, it was obvious how hard he trained. In response, Derek explained that otherwise, he simply would not have been able to survive as a mercenary. Then Elente asked him to leave behind his excessive modesty, adding that she respected hard-working people. However, she then warned that the magic teacher who was watching their fight most likely did not feel much sympathy towards him. She also expressed hope to show excellent results at the upcoming tournament in Salon Rose. The hero tried to calm her down, noting that with her level of skill there was little reason to worry. However, the girl admitted that she was not interested in weak opponents, since her real target was a completely different girl. Elente then revealed that she wanted nothing more than to defeat Aislinn Eleanor Duplain. It seemed to have some personal meaning to her. Derek just listened to her silently, without changing his usual calm expression. Realizing that she had said too much, the girl politely said goodbye to the guest. The hero bowed and headed towards the exit of the gazebo, and the girl thoughtfully watched him go. After he left, Elente pondered the name of the Belden mercenary group. Taking another sip of tea, she tried to remember where she had heard this name before. Suddenly the girl remembered how Aislinn once told her that Derek had become her new magic mentor. Elente's eyes widened, finally realizing who this young mercenary really was. Meanwhile, Derek walked through the outer courtyard of the estate. Suddenly, someone's hand grabbed his wrist, forcing him to stop. Turning around, the guy saw Elente in front of him, who had caught up with him. The hero looked at the girl, not understanding the reason for such an unexpected meeting. She asked with a satisfied smile if he really was the mercenary who taught magic to Diela. Meanwhile, evening began to fall on the city. Elente took the hero to one of the rooms with a fireplace. She got straight to the point and stated that she was willing to do anything if only he would help her defeat Iselin. The guy was surprised by such a proposal and asked whether her main desire was really to gain the upper hand over Lady Aislinn. The girl explained that her rival had not yet become a 2-star mage, so she was striving to reach that level first. Derek noticed that she had a very strong competitive spirit. In response, Elente only smiled and admitted that it was a very beautiful name for her real obsession. She then confessed that the desire to defeat Aislinn had once almost driven her to some very shameful actions. Looking down, the girl bitterly told how pathetic her jealousy of her rival actually was. No matter how much she tried to speak ill of Aislinn or find her faults, Aislinn tried to understand her and accept her again. Derek listened to the story and then asked why she decided to reveal all this to him. Then Elente explained that she needed to show sincerity, even if it meant showing her awkward side. The thing is, she was going to ask him some very important questions. The hero nodded and suggested that the girl ask everything that interested her. The girl noted that since he had worked for the Duplain family for some time, he knew very well the true level of Aislin's talent. She then added that after today's training, he also understood very well the limits of her own abilities. Elente wondered what she should do next. Finally, the girl asked the main question, asking to reveal to her the main secret of victory over Aislinn. The guy looked at her silently for a few seconds and then stated that Aislin's level was indeed astonishingly high. However, he also emphasized that Elente had enormous talent and, with enough diligence, could achieve a lot. At the same time, Derek noted that a person's true intentions could always be read in his eyes. Derek realized that she was not looking for empty praise or cheap self-affirmation. Elente was truly desperate and so eager to find an answer that she was even willing to ask a mercenary for help. At that moment, there was a brief silence between them. The guy took a deep breath, preparing to give an honest answer. He then looked the girl straight in the eyes and stated that in her current state, she had no chance of defeating such an opponent. Hearing such an assessment from her mentor, Elente noticeably turned pale. However, she had no intention of giving up even before the fight began. Gathering her courage, the girl firmly declared that she wanted to win at any cost. She was going to do it, even if everyone around her thought this goal was completely unattainable. Derek just watched her silently. Then Elente reminded him that the guy had managed to turn even the completely inexperienced Diela into a real magician. If he could achieve such a result with another student, then he was certainly capable of helping her defeat Aislinn as well. Faced with such persistence, the hero thought for a moment. Then he replied that it was entirely possible to find a suitable path. However, there were several important issues that bothered him. Hearing this, Elente noticeably perked up and settled more comfortably on the sofa, realizing that he was ready to discuss her proposal. Derek began listing his conditions and immediately touched on the first obstacle. He asked if the girl had any idea what his grueling training with Diela had been like. The young man's memory flashed back to his merciless methods of forcing his student to awaken her survival instinct. Elente was a little wary, but said she wasn't interested in the details at all. She only emphasized that she was ready to do absolutely everything to win. After this, the mercenary moved on to the second condition and reminded that he worked as an independent mercenary. However, the girl interrupted him, deciding that he was worried about possible rumors about a lady learning magic from a commoner. She assured Derek that she was absolutely serious and intended to become a renowned magician whose name would thunder throughout the empire. Elente added that it would be a real shame for her not to take first place among the nobility of Ebelstein. The girl asked not to doubt her determination over trifles because she understood perfectly well that victory was much more important than pride. The hero continued to look at her without changing his expression. He then interrupted her and explained that he had really only meant to say that he would have to pay for the tuition. Elente instantly froze, realizing what an awkward misunderstanding had just happened. Her face instantly turned red with embarrassment after such an unnecessary scene. Trying to hide her awkwardness, the girl quickly assured him that she would have no problem paying any amount he demanded. Derek decided that since her determination was so strong, he would use the harshest training methods to suit her mood. Meanwhile, in the city where the nobles of the Duplain family lived, morning had come. During a social gathering, Aislinn told her friends that she should have been preparing diligently for the magic tournament. Meanwhile, Elente herself watched the company from afar, realizing that she had finally waited for the right moment. She greeted him cheerfully and praised Aislinn for her modest expectations before the next fight. The girl was also very glad to see Elente. Aislinn approached her rival and admitted that they had just been discussing her. Elente noticed that she had heard her voice from afar. The other girls immediately stepped aside, not wanting to find themselves between two long-standing rivals. Elente asked if Aislinn really needed training, since she had never lost a fight. Aislinn thanked her, but noted that she could not allow herself to relax, since her next opponent would be Elente. Then the red-haired girl, with obvious superiority, announced that she had hired a new high-class magic tutor. Elente paused, then corrected Aislinn, stating that she was the one who truly trusted the man. After this, the girl smiled triumphantly and revealed the name of her new mentor, Derek. At that moment, genuine surprise appeared on Aislinn's face. She could already imagine how upset her rival would be to learn that she had lost such a teacher. However, instead of the expected envy, Aislinn was only surprised. Moreover, her eyes lit up with joy. The girl took Elente by the hands and sincerely congratulated her, assuring her that Derek was an exceptionally reliable person. She then congratulated her rival again with a broad smile, noting that such a mentor would be a huge help in her studies. Elente could only thank her awkwardly, completely unable to understand why she had received such a reaction instead of jealousy. Aislinn thought for a moment, remembering Derek's teaching methods. She had once also intended to invite him as a mentor, since she felt that her development in magic had slowed down a little. However, the memory then flashed back to Diela's despair, who tearfully begged her never to subject herself to such training. Returning to reality, Aislinn sighed, genuinely worried about the fate of her rival. Elente mistakenly decided that the girl was simply trying to hide her envy and confusion. She grinned smugly, confident that she had surpassed Aislinn, who now regretted missing out on the best magic mentor. Aislinn tried to warn her rival in a friendly manner about Derek's harsh nature, but Elente immediately interrupted her. The girl then said goodbye cheerfully and explained that the first day of classes required good preparation, so it was time for her to go. The red-haired girl ran away happily, and Aislinn looked after her for a long time with an expression of sincere pity. She understood perfectly well that Derek was not a bad person at all, but in the role of a mentor, he turned into a merciless tormentor. Nearby, Denise was drinking tea and watching the girls talking in the courtyard. She noted that her friends really gave it their all for the upcoming tournament. Meanwhile, in the tavern, everything went on as usual. Jaden noticed that Derek's partnership with the Belmiard family was gaining more and more high-profile clients. The hero agreed and noted that teaching students directly in Ebelstein was much more convenient than constantly traveling to their estates. The tavern owner asked if it was really possible to train someone well enough to defeat Aislinn in a duel. Derek took a sip of his drink and replied that such a task was not at all impossible. If Elente reaches the level of a 2-star mage first, the difference in strength will be too great for Aislinn. Jaden asked him to leave the unrealistic reasoning behind and instead tell them the real plan. The guy looked at him and explained that it was precisely to carry out this plan that he needed his friend's help. The mercenary captain immediately stared at the hero with disbelief. Derek then added that to be completely safe, he would also need Pellin's support during training. After these words, Jaden finally fell silent and looked at him even more suspiciously. He noticed that all this looked more like preparation for an extremely dangerous operation than ordinary magic training. In response, Derek said that the very world they lived in was already inherently dangerous. At this moment, Pellin suddenly burst into tears and complained that she had been cruelly deceived by scammers. She continued to be indignant, lamenting that she had fallen for their tricks, and Derek and Jaden only exchanged silent glances. Then the tavern owner sighed wearily and offered the young man to take Pellin with him. Sometime later, the story moved to the Belmiard family's training ground. Elente entered the arena and announced that they could begin the practical lesson. However, Derek immediately suggested that they fight 10 matches in a row without a single break. Upon hearing this, the girl froze in shock. Adjusting his gloves, the hero explained that he needed to objectively assess the real combat capabilities of his student. Elente noted that even by the standards of a former mercenary, this approach seemed incredibly cruel, but she accepted the challenge anyway. Blue mana flared around the young man's hands, after which he announced the start of the first round of training. Until the evening, explosions thundered over the training yard, and thick clouds of dust swirled above the walls. When the series of fights finally ended, the girl leaned on her knees, exhausted, and began to breathe heavily. Derek thanked her for her efforts and gave her 10 minutes of rest, after which they were to move on to practicing basic magic. Elente was truly horrified to learn that she had only been given 10 minutes, and she admitted that she had completely exhausted her mana reserves. However, the guy replied that if she continued to force herself to work, the mana would still find a way to manifest. The hero soon declared that the spell she had created could not be called an ice spear, and demanded that 10 more of the same be created. He asked what she expected to achieve if she couldn't even master the basics, and reminded her that she still had 5 more tries left. Derek then ordered the student to create 100 magic arrows, completely ignoring her protests about her complete lack of strength. Soon, completely exhausted, Elente collapsed onto the wooden floor of the training ground, breathing heavily from exhaustion. Only after this did the guy praise her for her efforts and allow her to go to dinner. He then asked if she was okay, and added that she could have given up on the training if it had proved too difficult. Hearing these words, the girl instantly jumped to her feet. She laughed and said that she would never give up because of such trifles, it was all just normal fatigue. Elente emphasized that Derek had no idea what she had already had to go through to survive in Ebelstein's high society. The hero bowed slightly and admitted that perhaps he had indeed jumped to conclusions. The girl explained that she was a little tired after the social event, but she was planning to give it her all tomorrow. Moreover, she suggested making the training even harder, stating that the current load was hardly felt. In response, Derek looked at her and asked what exactly she meant by tomorrow. A chill instantly ran down Alenta's spine, and she turned to her mentor in confusion. Then the guy reminded her that he had warned her about the planned night training, which was supposed to begin that evening. At that moment, an awkward pause hung between them. The girl tried to laugh it off, noting that he was very good at telling jokes. However, Derek replied that he had never done anything like that. The next day, the grueling training continued, with the hero forcing his student to work even harder. He demanded that 5 more magic arrows be created, while Alente trembled with fatigue as she tried to perform the spell. The girl screamed in despair, not understanding why he kept increasing the number of repetitions. Derek warned that if she couldn't run anymore, they would immediately move on to mana manifestation exercises. Later, Alente was sitting limply in her chair, breathing heavily, completely exhausted. Derek asked her if everything was okay, and she tried to maintain her dignity and said she had had an incredible time. The guy reiterated that it was okay to give up on training if she felt she could no longer continue. However, Alente stubbornly stated that giving up was not an option for her, and that such a difficult training was just a warm-up. Derek just looked at her silently. Then he announced that since she had already rested enough, it was time to move on to sparring. Hearing this, the girl was in real shock because she had only managed to sit down for a short time. So, 2 weeks have passed since the beginning of this ruthless training program. Alente lay face down on the table and begged Denise to wake her up as soon as Aislinn arrived. Then she thanked her friend and complained that practicing magic had exhausted her so much that she had almost no strength left. Denise continued reading the book and out of curiosity asked why the girl drove herself so mercilessly. For a while, Alente was silent, her face buried in her hands. Then she turned her head to the side and admitted that she had only put up with all this because she wanted to win more than anything else. Denise lowered the book and looked thoughtfully at her friend for a few seconds. She then closed it and asked Alente to hold on, promising that she would sincerely cheer for her. At that moment, Denise turned her gaze towards the garden and noticed the approaching guests. She saw Aislinn along with other girls who had come to another social gathering. The girl hastened to warn her friend that the heiress of the Duplain family had already arrived. Aislinn walked across the courtyard without even noticing the 2 girls nearby. Alente panicked and began frantically fixing her disheveled hair, afraid to appear before her rival in such a pitiful state. Meanwhile, the other girls were discussing the new fashion boutique that had opened in the city and making plans to visit it. The red-haired girl slumped even more in her chair, burning with shame at her exhausted and unkempt appearance. Almost in a whisper, she asked if Aislinn had passed by. Denise confirmed that she had already left. Then Alente breathed a huge sigh of relief, glad that her rival had not seen her in such a state. However, as she walked away with the other girls, Aislinn still glanced furtively over her shoulder. She thought with alarm that Alente looked unusually tired and exhausted today. Later that evening, night fell over the Belmiard estate. The maid finished combing Alente's hair and announced that a gift had arrived from the Duplain house. Upon opening the package, the girl discovered a wooden box containing expensive mana restoration potions and several flowers. The maid explained that these were extremely valuable items that allowed one to quickly replenish one's mana reserves. However, the girl only examined the contents and unexpectedly ordered that everything be immediately thrown into the trash. She declared that she did not wish to see these things in front of her any longer, and the maid had no choice but to obey. Then Alente asked if Derek had arrived yet, and the maid replied that the boy had been waiting for her in the courtyard since dawn. Along with the gift, Aislinn sent a letter with warm wishes, in which she wrote about the arrival of winter and pure white snow. While the maid combed her scarlet hair, Alente involuntarily recalled her rival's friendly lines. She asked her friend how they were getting on during this cold season. Aislinn also reported that this year the Duplain family's lands had produced a particularly rich harvest of high-quality goods. However, Alente, reading the wishes for a good day, only bit her lip harder from irritation and bitterness. Meanwhile, Derek was waiting in the courtyard of the estate, reading a book under the cloudy sky. Noticing the girl approaching, he closed the book. The hero immediately stood up to greet her and praised her for her punctuality. However, Alente replied that she had not come for empty talk. She then demanded an honest assessment of her abilities after several weeks of hard training. The hero thought for a moment. After this, he stated that the most sensible decision for her would be to refuse to participate in the upcoming fight altogether. Hearing this answer, the girl instantly froze. Then she gave him a pained look over her shoulder and asked why he continued to humiliate her like that. Derek apologized if his words came across as a personal insult. However, Alente turned around abruptly and screamed in rage, not understanding how he could even advise her to refuse the fight with her opponent. She indignantly reminded him that she had hired him for victory and not to listen to cowardly advice about surrender. The girl continued to vent her pent-up anger, categorically rejecting the very idea of giving up on her goal. She then demanded that Derek leave if he was going to keep saying things like that, as he was wasting her time. However, the hero did not understand what the point was if she still could not win. A blind obsession with victory often prevented a person from truly growing, and sometimes defeat had to be accepted with humility. Through tears, the girl said that if she came to terms with this, she would become the most pathetic person in the world. The main character just watched her silently. Alente admitted that she was a petty person and spoke ill of Aislinn behind her back because she was jealous of her talent. Through tears, the girl admitted that next to her rival, she always remained an envious and limited person. Alente cried even harder, finally admitting how weak, insignificant, and pathetic she felt compared to Isolene. Through her tears, the girl admitted that she understood perfectly well that she had no real reason to hate Aislinn. In utter despair, she asked herself why this terrible inferiority complex never went away. In fact, the young girl was tormented not by hatred for her rival, but by deep disgust for herself. Alente always felt a hidden and painful contempt for herself. This was the true reason for her incredible tenacity and obsessive desire to defeat Aislinn. From the outside, it all looked like ordinary envy or rivalry between noble families. However, Derek realized that the real object of her hatred was not Aislinn at all. The girl was trying with all her might to defeat herself. The hero realized that her desire did not arise from simple envy. Victory in this duel seemed to Alenta the only way to get rid of her own feelings of inferiority. Realizing the true reason, Derek stepped forward and firmly stated that then they would win this fight together. He then promised to do everything possible to ensure that she would eventually defeat Lady Aislinn. Wiping away her tears, Alente looked up at her mentor, hope returning to her eyes, and accepted his promise. The next day, a carriage left the Alente estate for the city. Soon the coachman pulled on the reins and the horses stopped. The carriage door opened and an elderly man, Alente's mentor, stepped out. The old man adjusted his glasses and looked around the property with a serious gaze. So he finally arrived in the county of Belmiard, where a magic tournament was soon to take place. Count Tristan Belmiard warmly welcomed Velmir, who had recently returned from a trip to Ebelstein. With a smile, the host invited the guest to sit down and rest after a long journey. Then the count asked how his daughter Elente was doing. Velmir replied that recently the girl had devoted herself entirely to magical training. Tristan said that he had never met such a talented girl, and was confident that in the future she would surpass even him. Velmir smiled tightly, thinking to himself that it would be a real disaster to mention that Alente had been trained by a mercenary. After this, the count unexpectedly announced that he was soon going to go on business to Ebelstein. Moreover, he added that he wanted to visit his daughter personally and give her a special gift. Velmir tried to hide his concern and replied that the girl would certainly be very happy. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Ebelstein, at the entrance to a mysterious nameless labyrinth, a group of people stopped. Pelin took a hesitant step towards the huge stone structure, still doubting the wisdom of this undertaking. She asked with concern if it was really safe to bring Alente to such a place. The girl looked at the entrance to the labyrinth with obvious anxiety, but the hero explained that it was the weakest labyrinth in the entire region. Despite this, the girl remained worried and asked what exactly she was supposed to do inside. Derek explained that she needed to sharpen her instincts in combat, and that the entire group would be there to protect her in case of danger. Having created a glowing ball of light in his palm, the guy reminded that there were only a few days left until the duel with Aislinn. Pelin supported him, noting that with such a shortage of time, the best way to become stronger was through real combat. Realizing that she had no choice, Alente only looked anxiously at her mentor. Then the whole group entered the stone labyrinth. Moving carefully along the corridors, the girl broke out in a cold sweat, feeling the ominous atmosphere of this place. Derek warned everyone to remain vigilant and reminded them that there was danger, even in the low-level labyrinth. Alente walked right behind him, flinching at every sound. Suddenly, Pelin narrowed her eyes, noticing a suspicious movement ahead. The archer immediately informed Derek that there were several goblins right in front of them, and upon hearing this, Alente panicked. However, the situation became even worse when Jaden warned that a huge creature, very similar to an ogre, was rapidly approaching from behind. The warrior pulled out his sword and noted that whether he would deal with the ogre would depend on how much extra money he would be paid for it. Derek focused his mana and replied that they would discuss payment after the task was completed. In the darkness, numerous red eyes flashed one after another, and a terrifying roar echoed through the corridor. Alente was completely horrified when she realized that for the first time, she was face to face with real monsters. Two enraged goblins rushed at the group with loud cries, spears thrust forward. Without wasting a second, the hero quickly rushed forward to intercept their attack. The girl froze in place, watching what was happening in shock. Derek ordered Pelin to cover him and rushed forward. His sword was enveloped in a bright blue glow as he fearlessly rushed towards the monsters. The archer pulled the bowstring and released a perfectly accurate arrow. The projectile hit the goblin square in the head, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, the guy prepared a powerful blow, not taking his eyes off the remaining enemies. With one swift and precise swing, he effortlessly cut one of the goblins in half. Immediately after this, Derek unleashed a devastating stream of fire at the next monster. Pelin instantly changed her position and again supported him with an accurate shot. At the same time, the hero pierced the throat of another monster, and dark blood splashed throughout the corridor. The archer continued to destroy the remaining enemies with unerring shots. Elente stood motionless, unable to recover from the brutality of the real battle she had just witnessed. Suddenly, there was a loud crash behind her, and Elente's eyes widened in horror. A huge ogre with blue skin appeared from the shadows, but Jaden immediately stepped forward, blocking its path. The warrior grinned confidently and asked sarcastically how much the monster's head cost. In response, the giant roared in fury and raised his massive wooden club to strike. Jaden delivered a crushing blow with his massive sword, leaving a deep wound in the ogre's stomach. The force of the attack was so monstrous that the blue giant was literally cut in half. Meanwhile, another goblin burned with a scream in the flames of Derek's spell. Then the hero finished off the last enemy, piercing his neck with one precise blow of his sword. Elente finally realized that these creatures were actually trying to kill her. The girl was overcome with genuine horror at the thought that she could die in this dark labyrinth. In the midst of her panic, she suddenly heard her mentor call her name loudly. Derek warned that one of the monsters was already running straight towards her and ordered her to focus immediately. Looking up, the girl saw a goblin rushing towards her, clutching a rough wooden club in his hands. Fear completely paralyzed her thoughts, and it seemed to her that right now, her life would end. Seeing the danger, the hero shouted that she needed to fight and destroy the monster if she wanted to survive. Looking into the face of her own death, Elente suddenly thought about what she had been like her whole life. She finally admitted to herself how stupid, arrogant, and ignorant she had been all this time. Elente still lay on the stone floor as the enemy rapidly closed the distance. She remembered her old bitterness and wondered again why the feeling of inferiority never left her heart. Elente realized that it was her own pride that prevented her from building anything truly valuable. She realized that she had always been her own worst enemy. She admitted that all her life she had only envied others and tried to humiliate them. However, the next moment, a bright blue energy burst out of her hands with great force. The girl put all her remaining mana into the attack and created a powerful, shining, magical spear. Elente decided that she had gone this far only to destroy her former weak self and finally become much stronger. Derek watched his student closely during this tense moment. With a lightning-fast movement, the girl released a spell that pierced the goblin's chest and threw him back. Jaden watched the proceedings in silence. Pelin also watched the fight silently. When the last enemy fell, silence finally reigned in the labyrinth. Elente leaned her hands on her knees and breathed heavily, completely exhausted physically and mentally. Despite her fatigue, her eyes now shone with determination and strength. The girl raised her head and looked at Derek, who stood among the defeated monsters. The hero nodded slightly in approval, and Elente felt like she had finally taken her first real step forward. A confident smile appeared on the redhead's face as she realized that she had managed to overcome her own limits. As the night deepened, Derek took advantage of the respite to reread the letter from his former mentor, Katie Flameheart. The woman apologized for being able to contact him only after more than 2 years. She said that she was now teaching magic to the daughter of a count and admitted that the girl's diligence sometimes tired her out greatly. Katya fondly remembered the times when she taught Derek magic. Even the most difficult days seemed much more fun back then. She also wrote that, of all the magicians she had met in her life, he was the most talented. Then the mentor wondered what level of power her beloved student had already reached by this time. The woman concluded the letter by expressing her hope to one day witness his magic with her own eyes again, when their paths crossed again. This is where Katya's letter ended. She seemed to be extremely relieved to finally be able to write to Derek. The guy carefully folded her letter back. Elent noticed that they had been training here for 2 weeks already and asked what the letter was that he reread at every opportunity. The hero briefly replied that it came from his former teacher. Elente smiled and remarked that she must have been an outstanding teacher to have been able to show so much patience in teaching him. Derek looked into her eyes silently, not knowing what to answer. He then agreed, saying that she was indeed a wonderful teacher. Elente was slightly embarrassed by such a direct answer. She turned away and quietly admitted that she only wanted to tease him a little, but almost immediately waved her hand and asked him to forget this conversation. After this, the hero reminded her that there were only 2 days left before the fight and asked how she felt before the upcoming battle. The girl thought for a moment and admitted that she could not yet fully understand her feelings. However, she was absolutely sure of one thing. After a short pause, Elente smiled and declared with complete confidence that she would definitely win this fight. 2 days later, a huge crowd of nobles gathered in the arena for magical duels in the noble quarter. In the center of the hall, Aislinn was chatting cheerfully with several friends as she waited for the tournament to begin. Suddenly, the girl felt a familiar presence, quickly looked up and froze. Aislinn glanced around the arena and spotted Derek, her attention immediately focused on him. Having apologized to her friends, the girl walked away from the group and headed straight towards the young man. She called Derek's name and he turned around. Iselin admitted with a smile that she was glad to see him, and the hero greeted her politely and reservedly in return. The girl then mentioned that she had recently learned of his studies with Lady Alente. Derek confirmed that he had indeed taught the girl magic. There was silence between them for a few seconds as they looked into each other's eyes. Iselin noticed with a smile that he hadn't changed at all, after which she jokingly asked if he had trained Alente too harshly. Diela told her about his outstanding teaching abilities, but Alente herself had looked extremely exhausted lately. In response, Derek asked if she was genuinely worried about her opponent or if she was just overconfident. The hero warned her not to let her guard down under any circumstances, no matter who her opponent was. Iselin swallowed involuntarily, feeling fear at the warning. Meanwhile, in the stands, spectators were discussing the upcoming fight. Most were confident of Iselin's victory, unless Alente suddenly demonstrated the magic of 2 stars. One of the noblewomen noticed that Alente had noticeably lost weight from constant training, and Denise silently listened to their conversation. Soon the footsteps of the first participant, Iselin, were heard on the arena stairs. The crowd immediately became animated and began to whisper when Iselin appeared on the field. The audience never ceased to admire her beauty, grace, and elegance. Immediately after this, the second participant approached the entrance to the arena. Alente moved slowly towards the center of the field, quietly repeating to herself that she would definitely emerge from here as a winner. Alente took her place under the watchful eyes of everyone present. She looked forward, her eyes burning with determination to achieve victory at any cost. Meanwhile, Derek, leaning against a stone column outside the arena, silently watched his student. Finally, both rivals stood opposite each other in the very center of the court. Iselin greeted Alente politely and expressed her hope that all had been well with her over the past few weeks. The girl responded with the same courtesy and praised her rival's calmness, but was unexpectedly surprised by her reaction. Iselin looked away slightly and noted that she did not deserve such praise. Then she honestly admitted that she had never experienced such strong excitement before a fight. Alente smiled and finally suggested that the fight begin. In response, Iselin nodded and concentrated completely. At that moment, Alente released her magical energy, and a golden flame erupted around her hand. In response, Iselin enveloped herself in an icy blue aura that quickly grew stronger with each passing second. The first clash of their magical auras created a powerful gust of wind that swept across the entire arena. Then Alente began to rapidly chant a spell, summoning dozens of fiery magical runes around her. Iselin looked up and was shocked to realize the scale of the impending attack. Countless shining fiery spears appeared above the arena one after another, ready to fall down at any moment. Soon the entire sky was covered in golden flames, created by Alente's incredible power. Standing under the firestorm, the girl remembered the instructions Derek had given her a few days earlier. In the labyrinth, the guy explained that she would never win if the fight was reduced to just comparing mastery of magic. He emphasized that the real key to victory would be solely her willpower. Derek reminded her that the grueling training was necessary to force her to use every drop of mana. Then Alente asked with a smile if all this was not his cruel infatuation. Derek explained that once the mana reserves were completely depleted, the outcome of the fight was decided by the one with the most tenacity left. He then told her to use a large, showy attack from the start to draw Iselin into a drawn-out battle of attrition. He added that the winner will be the one who can squeeze out the last drop of strength. However, Alente asked what to do if the opponent initially had more mana. The hero briefly replied that in that case she would simply lose. However, he reminded that the amount of mana was determined at birth, and the blood of the Belmiard family endowed her with enormous magical potential. After that, Derek gave her the most important advice, to believe in herself, and these words sounded in Alenta's memory again. Iselin looked at the giant wall. She could hardly believe that Alente could become so strong. With a sharp movement, Alente gave the order to the arrows to attack. At that very moment, a huge rain of golden fire arrows fell from the sky, heading straight for Iselin. Iselin saw a rain of flames rapidly approaching. However, at the last moment, she concentrated her mana, creating a strong water-protective barrier. The powerful elemental attack collided with the shield with a roar, creating a huge explosion of blinding steam. Through the clouds of steam, the girls' eyes met. Both were determined to win this fight. Meanwhile, Alente continued to rain down an endless hail of flaming spears on her opponent. Alente remained focused, channeling all her energy into the attack. Meanwhile, Iselin steadfastly withstood the onslaught, remaining in the center of the protective water vortex. She watched the attack closely, analyzing the trajectory of the arrows that rained down on her defenses without stopping. Alente's flames continued to lash out furiously at her opponent's barrier, sending thick clouds of smoke and dust rising above the arena. In the stands, the nobles watched the scene in amazement, everyone amazed at how vast Alente's mana reserves had become. Despite this, Iselin continued to defend herself, neutralizing each new attack. Iselin quickly calculated that no matter how powerful the attack, at this rate her opponent would soon completely exhaust her mana. However, the girl soon squinted, noticing a quickly moving dark silhouette in the smoke. Through the veil of dust, it seemed to her that Elente was rushing straight towards her. Deciding to counterattack, Aiseline concentrated her mana. She then instantly fired an ice arrow at the approaching enemy. However, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Elente's movements seemed too strange and unnatural. The next moment, Aiseline's eyes widened in horror. She realized that she had not attacked the real Elente at all, but only an illusion of her. Her opponent used illusion magic to deceive her, even though such a technique required a huge expenditure of mana. It was then that the real Elente suddenly appeared behind her, descending from above, with a glowing ice spear in her hands. Aiseline turned around sharply, but there was no time left to defend herself. Elente put all her strength into the blow, trying to hit her opponent. Derek's words about this tactic being ideal for a surprise attack came back to the girl's mind. A dense curtain of fire blinded the enemy, and then illusion magic created the perfect opportunity to strike with an ice spear. However, the hero immediately warned that Aiseline was far from an ordinary magician, and that defeating her would not be so easy. Elente put the last of her strength into a decisive attack, and seeing the spear rapidly approaching, Aiseline panicked. The distance turned out to be too small to have time to create a magical defense. Then the girl took the risk of relying solely on her reflexes. At the last moment, she grabbed his wrist and literally changed the direction of the blow for a split second. Elente screamed and tried with all her might to finish the attack. The collision of two magical forces caused a powerful explosion of energy right between them. The shockwave was so strong that it threw both participants in different directions of the arena. Elente slid back, breathing heavily, her weapon lodged in the ground. Aiseline also managed to maintain her balance, but after the direct collision, she was noticeably exhausted. Looking up, Elente was surprised to notice that her rival was now emitting a completely different aura. She watched warily as Aiseline adopted a new fighting stance. Aiseline breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that she had only narrowly escaped defeat. Then she remembered Derek's warning to never underestimate any opponent. It was now that the girl fully realized the true meaning of his words. Aiseline realized that Elente had changed beyond recognition, both in her skill level and in her ability to use magic. Taking a step forward, she decided not to hold back any longer and responded with full force. At that very moment, ice spears began to rapidly grow around her feet. Every step Aiseline took was accompanied by the appearance of dozens of copies. In just a few seconds, an incredible number of huge ice spikes hung above the arena, obeying her will. The spectators in the stands gasped in admiration again. No one could believe that she had managed to create so many copies without casting a spell. While the crowd roared with excitement, Derek watched the fight, leaning against one of the columns. The hero remained focused, realizing that Aiseline had just fallen into the trap they had prepared in advance. Meanwhile, Elente kept a close eye on the battlefield, observing her opponent's every move. Aiseline, however, acknowledged that her opponent had made amazing progress in recent weeks. However, Elente discreetly held one hand behind her back, where a faint trace of magical energy flickered. The fiery arrow, fired at the very beginning of the battle, rose unnoticed high into the sky and disappeared into the bright sunlight. Aiseline aimed giant ice spears at her opponent and challenged her, confident that she would not be able to stop such an attack. Elente watched the approaching projectiles carefully, then she concentrated a small amount of mana into her fingertips. With a sharp movement, the girl forced the fiery arrow hiding in the sky to change its trajectory and rush downwards. Aiseline noticed movement above and looked up. Realizing what was happening, her eyes widened, realizing that she had been caught off guard again. The next second, a fire arrow exploded right above her, destroying the ice spears and scattering ice shards across the arena. Aiseline was left perplexed, unable to sense the moment the spell was cast, or even the slightest flow of mana. Aiseline concluded that Elente had hidden the fire arrow in the sky at the very beginning of the firestorm. The realization that her rival had prepared such a well-thought-out trap in advance visibly shocked the girl. Meanwhile, the shell hit the ground next to the blue-haired girl. Elente chuckled slightly, pleased that her tactics had worked completely. Aiseline broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that she could no longer predict her opponent's next move. Meanwhile, the spectators were amazed to hear that both girls were fighting on equal terms, although no one expected such an outcome. For a moment, Elente felt like she was finally beginning to surpass Aiseline. However, Aiseline took a deep breath and realized that she couldn't win if she continued to play by her opponent's rules. She admitted that Elente was her superior in courage and fighting ingenuity. Then Aiseline closed her eyes for a moment. After this, she decided to completely change the course of the fight and impose her own conditions. Derek immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. The hero watched the arena closely and noted that the real battle was just beginning. Iselin exhaled slowly and concentrated the remaining mana into the very center of her body. A huge amount of blue magical energy swirled around her, causing her hair and clothes to flutter. Elente involuntarily stepped back, watching what was happening with bewilderment. Then, a powerful gust swept across the entire arena, forcing the girl to cover herself with her hands. Soon, Elente realized with horror that it was not the wind at all, but pure, concentrated mana that was raging around her. Her eyes widened as she felt the surrounding atmosphere change dramatically. The girl realized in a panic that she no longer felt or could control the mana around her. Derek witnessed a rare phenomenon where all the surrounding magical energy disappeared in an instant. It was mana alignment, a phenomenon where a colossal surge of power would subjugate all nearby mana. This only happened when the magician managed to go far beyond his own physical capabilities. Meanwhile, a giant sphere of fire began to form above Aiselin's head. Seeing this, Elente froze in shock. It became obvious that her opponent had just now managed to overcome her own limits and break through to a new level. A huge 2-star fireball hung above the arena, illuminating everything around with a blinding light. At that moment, Elente remembered how, during a tough training session, she had fallen onto the grass, exhausted. Then Derek brought her a flask of water so she could recover from another day of grueling training. The girl confessed to her mentor that she was still tormented by doubts about her own abilities. She wondered if a few weeks of training would really be enough to defeat someone as talented as Iselin. Then the guy replied that she would definitely win, and explained that he didn't mean what she thought at all. According to him, from one point of view, her victory was already a foregone conclusion. Meanwhile, the spectators in the stands panicked and began screaming when they recognized the destructive spell. Everyone was amazed to see that Aiselin had managed to create a 2-star fireball right in the middle of the arena. Elente was overcome with despair when she saw the size of the blazing sphere and realized that the situation was completely out of control. She quickly turned to Derek, pleading with his eyes for a hint as to what she should do next. However, the hero only looked at her with his usual cold expression. Left without a hint, the girl cursed at her mentor, begging him to stop being silent and give her at least some useful advice. Then she turned back to the rapidly approaching threat. A giant 2-star fireball fell onto the arena like a real meteorite. Elente screamed in despair as she saw that the devastating attack was already very close. She realized that a normal magical barrier, or ice spears, would be useless against such a spell. For a moment, the girl gave in to despair, deciding that such a weak person like her would never be able to surpass Aiselin. Meanwhile, Denise watched the decisive moment of the fight closely. In the stands, the other girls covered their mouths in horror. However, at the last moment, Elente jumped to the side and released her attack as a giant fireball crashed into her. Iselin's eyes widened in shock, realizing that her opponent had decided on such a risky maneuver. The spell exploded with monstrous force, sending up huge clouds of dust, smoke, and rock debris into the air. Elente covered her face with her hands, protecting herself from the hot shock wave. The blast wave threw her back with force, and the girl lost her balance, sliding across the stone floor. Meanwhile, Aiselin began to breathe heavily, feeling her strength rapidly fading. Meanwhile, Elente leaned her hand on the ground. Even after such an attack, she was still in a state of combat readiness. Iselin couldn't believe that her opponent had managed to dodge her most powerful attack so deftly. Iselin realized that Elente was using the same method she had after seeing it just once, and Derek noticed it too. The thing is that Iselin lacked experience. She used the magic of the second star, being an inexperienced mage. In that case, such magic simply became a magic-devouring monster. Iselin clenched her fist tightly, refusing to admit defeat. Derek, watching the scene, realized that she had finally recognized her rival's talent and tenacity. That's why she decided to fight with all her might. Such a fierce attitude was a sign of respect for the person who had put in so much effort to get close to her level. Elente also sensed her opponent's intentions and smiled. If she could withstand this onslaught, the path to victory would open itself. Deciding to end the duel, Aiselin gathered the last of her strength for one more powerful spell. She told herself that she would definitely win this fight, after which she launched a new fireball at her opponent. The girl winced painfully and groaned from exhaustion, forcing her body to work beyond its limits. The flaming spell rushed towards Elente. The crowd in the stands screamed in amazement as Aiselin managed to create another fireball in a row. They were amazed to note that the new attack was flying even faster than the previous one. Elente ran to the side as fast as she could. At the same time, her opponent tried to control the trajectory of the flame. A huge fiery projectile relentlessly pursued the girl throughout the arena. She then performed an impressive acrobatic somersault, again avoiding a direct hit. Using the momentum of the jump, the girl rose as high as possible, simultaneously preparing for a counterattack. She took up a position right in the air against the backdrop of the sun, completely blocking the enemy's view from below. Iselin tried to look up, but the blinding sunlight prevented her from seeing her target. Taking advantage of this, Elente rushed downwards. She understood that an attack from above left her opponent no opportunity to predict the direction of the blow. The girl created an ice spear and decided that another protective barrier would completely exhaust Iselin's strength. Then Elente, like lightning, rushed down with a weapon in her hands, forcing her opponent to defend herself. Completely exhausted, Iselin sank to her knees and was no longer able to dodge. She only managed to create a weak ice barrier to soften the blow a little. Elente immediately noticed that this was only a tiny fraction of her former power. All her mana was spent on creating and controlling the fireballs. Then the girl put everything into the attack to destroy the last defense. Iselin watched her approach with wide eyes, breathing heavily in anticipation of the outcome. Derek watched this and realized that the fight was nearing its end. Meanwhile, Elente was confident that she had driven her opponent into a corner and that she no longer had the strength to strike back. Her own mana would have been enough for 2 more ice spears or magic arrows, and that was more than enough for victory. Fully confident of success, she delivered the decisive blow. However, suddenly Elente's eyes widened in horror. A huge golden glow suddenly flared up right between the opponents, instantly stopping her attack. Meanwhile, Iselin was leaning her hand on the ground with great difficulty, trying to cope with exhaustion. Elente watched in amazement as her attack disintegrated in mid-air. The girl was silent for a few seconds, trying to understand where this protection came from. Iselin began to tremble uncontrollably among the shards of ice scattered across the stone floor. She prayed to herself to use magic just one more time, knowing that she only needed to make one last effort. And then a tiny blue light flared up in her trembling palm. Elente just watched this in silence. Iselin's gaze once again shone with a bright blue light. She wanted to prove to everyone that she had no intention of giving up at all. At that moment, Elente finally realized something. She realized that in all of Ebelstein, there was no more noble girl than Iselin Eleonora Duplain. She thought that where the light shone especially brightly, a deep shadow inevitably appeared, and this shadow, hidden in the darkness, was always herself. The girl remembered how those around her called her just another spoiled girl. People were constantly asking what made her different from everyone else, and whispering behind her back. Back then, Elente dreamed of seeing her rival break down one day and show her despair. However, the reality turned out to be completely different. Iselin turned around with a soft smile, showing no sign of weakness. Elente realized that her opponent was like a precious stone that shone brighter the more they tried to break it. In front of this blinding light, the girl again felt herself thrown into darkness. Shadows of uncertainty enveloped her completely, pulling her deeper and deeper. It seemed as if she was sinking into a bottomless abyss created by her own feelings of inferiority. But even finding herself in this darkness, Elente was not going to give up. She continued to move forward stubbornly. She secretly improved her abilities just so that one day she could reach that distant radiance. More than anything, the girl wanted to prove her own worth and finally escape from the endless abyss. Then, in the arena, Elente slowly approached her defeated opponent. She noticed that despite her disheveled hair and the fall in front of the entire public, Iselin still retained her elegance. Her rival did not lose any of her dignity. The girl wondered how her rival managed to remain so calm and determined in such a situation. Then she realized that Iselin had never cared about making a perfect impression on others. The only thing that mattered to her was to give it her all in everything she undertook. Meanwhile, the spectators in the stands began to loudly cheer for Iselin, begging her to get up and continue the fight. Then Elente lit a small flame in her palm, knowing full well what decision she had to make. Then she remembered Derek's words before the fight. At that time she doubted whether she would be able to win, but her mentor assured her that victory would be hers. Now, looking at the light in her hand, the girl finally realized the true meaning of these words. She realized that even if she achieved victory at any cost, it would not bring her the long-awaited peace of mind. She will only remain forever a prisoner of her own dissatisfaction and bitterness. Meanwhile, Iselin tried to gather the rest of her mana. However, Elente suddenly sighed heavily. She announced in a feigned, surprised voice that her mana had completely run out, so she could no longer continue the fight. Iselin looked at her rival in confusion, completely not understanding what was happening. Then Elente turned away, noticing that she was still no match for her. After this, she officially admitted defeat and thanked Iselin for a great fight. The arena immediately erupted in applause, with the spectators admiring Iselin's performance throughout the entire battle. Elente only smiled sincerely, feeling for the first time that the weight that had been pressing on her heart for many years had finally disappeared. Iselin continued to silently watch her rival leave, still unable to understand the reason for such an unexpected decision. Thus, their duel was over, and evening slowly began to descend upon the city. Soon the guests surrounded Iselin, congratulating her on her victory and asking when she managed to master such powerful 2-star magic. The girl herself stood motionless for some time, comprehending everything that had happened. She watched as Elente's silhouette gradually disappeared into the distance. Meanwhile, Derek watched what was happening near the stone column. Approaching the mentor, Elente asked if he had seen the entire fight, and the hero confirmed that he had watched it closely. The girl joked that she, too, knew how to accept defeat gracefully, and the look of surprise on her opponent's face was priceless. The hero looked at her and asked how she felt after everything that happened. Alente tried to hide her emotions, continuing to laugh at Isoline's confused reaction. She then thanked her mentor for everything he had done for her and admitted that she finally felt a sense of victory over herself. After this, the girl casually asked if she had done well and if she had turned out to be a capable student. However, despite the smile and cheerful tone, a tear unexpectedly rolled down her cheek. She could no longer hold back her tears, although she continued to smile. Derek just looked at her and said nothing. Seeing the sympathy in her mentor's eyes, Alente finally couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears. Then she sank to the floor, covered her face with her hands, and quietly said that she was ashamed to cry like a little child. The guy then said that she had performed brilliantly and had done a truly great job. Derek stayed next to Alente, allowing the student to release her pent-up feelings. Finally, the girl sincerely admitted that she dreamed with all her heart of winning this fight. However, at the decisive moment, she realized that victory achieved in this way would not change the emptiness inside her. She understood that if she won in this way, she would forever remain a prisoner of her own complexes. So it became clear to her that, without an honest admission of her feelings, she would inevitably return to her former bitterness. At that moment, silence reigned in the hall. Derek decided to let the girl speak out completely. Alente admitted that the only thing she truly surpassed Aislinn in was her own inferiority complex. She realized with regret that in the end she was no different from those people whom she had once condemned. Derek then remarked that he saw nothing wrong with occasionally showing weakness and allowing himself to be vulnerable. The girl raised her tear-stained eyes to him upon hearing these words. The hero explained that without the courage to admit one's own shortcomings, a person will never be able to change and become better. These words sank deep into Alenta's soul. As they stood silently under the rays of the setting sun, she felt the long-awaited relief gradually spreading inside her. This time, instead of being plunged into darkness, she felt as if she were standing firmly in clear water. The girl smiled, realizing that for the first time she had taken a real step toward liberation from the abyss in which she had lived for so long. Meanwhile, in another part of the arena, Denise watched Derek thoughtfully. Denise watched him and his student with curiosity and quiet interest. Meanwhile, the other girl said goodbye to Aislinn, praising the spectacular fight they had witnessed. Denise congratulated her friend on her victory and admitted that her strength gave her goosebumps from the very beginning to the end. When they were alone, Aislinn immediately asked if Denise had noticed the true nature of this fight. Then she frankly admitted that she understood perfectly well that the victory did not actually belong to her. In response, Denise only smiled mysteriously. Aislinn continued to look at her friend, waiting for her answer. Then Denise noticed that Aislinn still had significantly more magical power than the others. However, Aislinn disagreed, explaining that mana reserves alone were not enough to surpass Alente. She could not understand how her rival had managed to develop so rapidly in such a short time. At that moment, the image of Derek appeared in her memory, the only logical explanation for such incredible changes. Then the girl finally decided to reveal this secret. She called the maid Daisy, who immediately appeared before her mistress. Aislinn ordered everything necessary to be prepared. She was going to send a letter to her family's main residence. She firmly decided to find out the truth about the mysterious Derek at any cost. Meanwhile, important political issues were being discussed at the luxurious estate of the Duplan family. Raymond looked through the documents with interest, wondering why the 6-star pass had ended up in Ebelstein. Valerian explained that the reason remained unknown, but the customs agreement was accelerated precisely because of these movements. The Duke assumed that Count Belmiard's unexpected arrival in the region was almost certainly connected with the same events. If such a renowned and wise master was involved in what was happening, then there was a very serious reason behind it all. At this point, Valerian informed his father that Aislinn had requested that he find a new magic tutor for her. Raymond noted that they could simply hire any suitable teacher. However, the guy explained that his sister had asked Derek specifically. The problem was that he was currently teaching magic to Alenta Belmiard. After some thought, the Duke wanted to instruct the family butler to personally conduct negotiations with the future mentor. However, Valerian stated that a mediator would not be needed. He volunteered to handle it himself, explaining that he was planning to go to Ebelstein anyway on unfinished business. Meanwhile, the sun was slowly setting. On the terrace of her estate, Alente informed Derek that she had decided to take a break from her magical studies. The hero listened attentively to the student, maintaining his usual calm. The girl admitted that after all the trials, she needed time to sort out her own thoughts. She then asked if the boy would continue to serve in Belden's mercenary squad, and the hero confirmed this. After this, Alente playfully touched the toe of his boot to attract his attention. Leaning towards the table and smiling amiably, the girl looked at him with interest. She then asked if he would come back immediately if she asked him to be her mentor again one day. Derek thought for a moment, realizing that a connection had formed between them during this time. Then he replied with a slight smile that he would definitely return, although, in his opinion, he could hardly teach her anything new. Alente laughed and jokingly remarked that such unexpected modesty was not at all in keeping with his character. Afterwards, she noted with relief that the long, harsh winter had finally come to an end, giving way to spring. Later that evening, the hero returned to the Belden's Tier Tavern. The wooden door swung open, causing all the visitors to turn their attention to the person who entered. At this time, Pelin was just winning another game at the casino, collecting the winning coins from the table. Seeing her friend, the archer happily waved at him, and Jaden looked in his direction. Derek greeted his friends and announced with a smile that he was finally back home. Already in the morning, a luxurious carriage was racing quickly along a distant road. She was heading straight to the city. Inside, Count Tristan Belmiard gazed thoughtfully at the scenery through the window as the carriage approached his estate. Meanwhile, Elente was sleeping peacefully in her room until an insistent knock on the door woke her up. The girl buried her face in her pillow and shouted that she had warned everyone in advance about her break from classes. However, the maid explained that the mistress needed to go down to the living room, as something very important had happened. Sleepy Elente reluctantly got out of bed and grumbled that the guests could have simply been notified of her absence. Then she opened the door slightly, intending to repeat that, from that day on, she was officially on vacation. However, the girl didn't have time to finish. Her father's voice interrupted her. Tristan opened his arms wide and came out to meet her with a smile. However, before the Count could get any closer, the door slammed shut right in front of his nose. Elente pressed her back against the door in complete shock, frantically trying to understand what her father was doing here so early. Then she opened the door slightly and apologized, asking him to wait a little in the living room while she tidied herself up. Tristan began to theatrically lament such a cold reception from his beloved daughter. Later, Elente finally went out to sit with her father in the garden. The Count noted that the young heiress of the Duplain family would certainly prove to be a very strong opponent in the duel. Elente agreed and admitted that she had learned a lot from the fight, and her father praised her mentor's abilities. Tristan happily stated that the best solution now would be to hire Derek exclusively to serve the Belmiard family. Elente was surprised and thought that the advisors and vassals would certainly oppose such a decision. However, the Count only laughed and assured his daughter that he was ready to do anything for her happiness. He then gently asked her to trust his decisions, and the girl smiled gratefully. Meanwhile, our main hero's squad once again set off into the ancient, mysterious labyrinth. The sounds of fierce battle and bursts of magical energy echoed within the dark green ruins. Suddenly, Pelin warned Derek of danger approaching from behind. A ferocious monster jumped out of the shadows, intending to attack the hero from behind while he was concentrating on the spell. Without a second's hesitation, the boy directed a huge flow of mana into his right hand to repel the attack. At that moment, his eyes flashed a bright red light as he felt an extremely unusual change in his mana. At the last moment, Derek released a powerful stream of shining power, stopping the surprise attack. He then prepared to cast an incredibly powerful 3-star spell, focusing it entirely on the enemy. The hero created an impressive fire barrier, protecting himself. A flash of flame engulfed the space around and threw the goblin away with great force. Pelin screamed her friend's name in horror, shocked by the power of the explosion. A deafening roar frightened the birds, and the flock soared into the sky above the dense mountain forest. Soon after, evening fell upon the city, and our heroes headed home. Later that evening, word quickly spread through the tavern that Derek had nearly died during the mission. Pelin indignantly asked why the hero had used such risky 3-star magic against ordinary goblins. The guy explained that he felt strange changes in his own mana, exactly the same as when he reached 2-star rank. He then wondered why he felt so uneasy about his current magical limitations. Suddenly, someone said that there was no point in trying to force a breakthrough, since the wildlife school always valued the natural flow. All the visitors turned to the stranger who had unexpectedly intervened in the conversation. Derek immediately realized that he hadn't felt the slightest trace of mana from him. However, the next moment he recognized the stranger as the greatest 6-star seeker mage. Introducing himself as Dressed Wolftail, the wanderer asked to bring him a good drink to relieve his accumulated fatigue. Meanwhile, night fell on the Duplain family estate. On the balcony, Diella was training with concentration, a powerful bluish magical aura thickening around her. The girl raised her hands and began to gather energy, intending to create a complex spell. Her eyes were blazing with determination, and her entire attention was focused on technique. Soon, several blue magical spears began to form in the air. Gritting her teeth and clenching her fists tightly, the girl tried with all her might to maintain control over the magic. She kept summoning more and more spears, despite being severely exhausted. However, she suddenly gasped in fear, realizing that she had completely lost control of the accumulated energy. All the magical spears instantly disintegrated into hundreds of flickering sparks. Frustrated by her failure, Diella sank to her knees and complained in annoyance that it had all been terribly tiring. At that moment, her brother Rhaeg emerged from the shadows and noted with slight irony that her hot temper had not changed at all. He praised her, noting that she had already learned to create 5 copies, and asked if this was due to her former mentor. Diella turned away angrily and declared that she had achieved everything thanks to her own talent and not at all thanks to her selfish teacher. Then Rhaeg revealed that Aizelin was planning to hire this particular mentor for her own training. Rhaeg added that he had recently heard rumors at one of the balls that Alente was also trying to keep Derek exclusively for herself. Diela felt a strong sense of envy, wondering why this man was so popular among the noblewomen. In response, her brother joked that since he had managed to turn her into a well-mannered girl, it was no wonder his services were in demand. Then he began to think that perhaps it would really be better for Derek to accept the offer to work for Aizelin. In that case, Diela would have an excellent chance to meet again with the teacher, whom she seemed to really want to see. The girl immediately blushed and, stammering, began to deny that she ever wanted to meet him again. However, Rhaeg did not believe her words and noted that Derek's fame and rumors about his teaching methods had probably already spread throughout the region. Diela sincerely hoped that the number of girls interested in her former mentor would not increase. Meanwhile, the evening passed quietly in the tavern. The wanderer drained a huge mug of alcohol in one gulp, while Derek watched him closely. The hero tried to understand why a magician of such an incredible level ended up in such a simple tavern. Then the old man turned to him and asked him point blank if his name was really Derek. The boy confirmed this, surprised that the legendary magician already knew his name. Then the wanderer suggested talking in private. Before giving an answer, the hero looked at his interlocutor in silence for a few seconds. During the walk, Drest admitted that Derek's talent and style of magic seemed extremely unusual and difficult to understand. He noted that his abilities are truly outstanding. However, the nature of his power remained a mystery. The old man then asked what his ultimate goal was by so persistently perfecting magic. Derek replied that he never aspired to great things, and only wanted to develop the talent he once discovered in himself. He admitted that he was driven by simple curiosity to find out how far a person is capable of expanding his own limits. A friendly smile appeared on Drest's face, as the hero's sincere desire made a strong impression on him. He noticed that for a commoner who dreamed of reaching the highest levels of magic, Derek still lacked some knowledge. Then Drest offered to personally become his mentor and help him in his further development. The hero froze in surprise, realizing that the offer came from Drest Wolftail himself, the legendary 6-star mage. Drest reached 2-star rank before coming of age, and then, when he started a family, he achieved 3-star rank. However, it was in the year he reached the 4th star that his life was destroyed by a terrible tragedy. Returning home during a severe thunderstorm, the man discovered a brutal, bloody massacre inside. His entire family was brutally murdered, which completely broke the magician. The count, who was behind this, asked whether the grief-stricken magician had finally calmed down and stopped causing trouble. The other aristocrats laughed arrogantly, declaring that commoners were cowards and should not dream of the power of magic. Moreover, they were confident that they would easily deal with him if he dared to seek revenge. However, their complacency instantly turned to horror when an uninvited guest appeared in the hall. The hooded man decapitated the royal guard with one blow. The aristocrats stared in panic into the bright green eyes of Drest, who had come here for revenge. The mage mercilessly released another wave of green energy, cutting off the nobleman's leg. Soon the scoundrel lost his second leg, without ever having time to reach the exit. He collapsed onto the stone floor, realizing that he had no way out. The nobleman crawled across the bloody floor, begging through tears for mercy. However, the magician completely ignored these requests, and instead cut out his tongue to stop him from talking. Soon, the aristocrat's final cry of agony was heard outside the walls of the luxurious mansion. After the revenge was accomplished, Drest hid from the imperial family and all the nobility for 30 years. However, when he reached the 5th and then the 6th star, the crown realized what a danger such a powerful enemy posed. Realizing that continuing the feud was too risky, the rulers pardoned him and granted him a title of nobility. Thus, he became the only commoner who managed to achieve noble status solely through magical power. Remembering this incredible story, Derek couldn't help but wonder if he was worthy of studying with such an outstanding man. However, he quickly pulled himself together and decided that there was no reason to refuse such a valuable chance. Meanwhile, in the noble district of Ebelstein, influential rulers gathered in the central hall of Cleon. There, the aristocrats considered plans for expanding their holdings and discussed the hidden dangers of the labyrinths located in the White Zone. Duke Andalof Veltus offered to provide his knights to ensure the safety of the upcoming expedition into these dangerous lands. Raymond asked with obvious mockery if the knights he was so proud of were just low-level mercenaries. Andalof noted that managing such a vast estate with only a personal guard must have been extremely tiring. He hinted that Raymond should simply give up these lands. In response, Duplain only stared at him, and the atmosphere in the room became so heavy that it seemed like a fight was about to break out. Realizing that the situation was rapidly getting out of control, Count Belmiard hastened to intervene. Raymond regained his composure and remarked that he had heard rumors of a recent duel where Alente had fought his daughter Aislinn. Count Belmiard proudly confirmed that, despite the defeat, his daughter's talent had finally begun to blossom. Raymond then admitted that with the support of an outstanding mentor, the girl could very well one day surpass Aizelin. Then he adjusted his glasses and directly named the name of this mysterious teacher, Derek, which noticeably surprised the Count with his knowledge. Duplain stated that if Derek were to train Aislinn, then Alente would never be able to catch up with his daughter. Hearing this, Tristan immediately flared up, since his rival's words hurt his paternal pride. He retorted sharply that Derek and Alente had developed a very strong relationship. Observing this, Duke Veltus became interested in the personality of the mentor, for whom two of the most influential families were competing. Therefore, he decided to immediately instruct Denise to thoroughly investigate the past and origins of the mysterious teacher. The next morning, we head to the tavern again. Jaden greeted Count Tristan warmly as he entered, accompanied by his elite guards. However, the smile quickly disappeared from the mercenary's face when he realized what the purpose of the unexpected visit was. Count Belmiard immediately asked if it was really the real leader of the mercenary detachment standing before him. Tristan explained that he had come personally to discuss the terms of Derek's exclusive employment. He explained that he had not received any response to the official letter sent by his head butler. Jaden sheepishly admitted that Derek had been missing for several days, and the entire squad had tried unsuccessfully to find him. The Count initially suspected that the Duplain or Veltus families might have secretly kidnapped the young man. However, he quickly abandoned this version due to the lack of any evidence, and eventually decided to personally lead the search. Meanwhile, we are transported to the residence of the Grand Duke Veltus above Ebelstein. Denise thoughtfully bit into a piece of apple and carefully reread the official letter. She asked the maid Bella when exactly the message arrived. She told her that the head of the family had sent it early in the morning as extremely urgent. After reading the order to find Derek and hire him as a mentor, the girl quickly realized that her father wanted to take advantage of the moment. Denise sighed heavily and quietly complained that the endless family squabbles had already tired her out. What particularly upset her was that this particular day had enormous personal significance for her. With a dreamy smile, the girl remembered that today, the new novel of her favorite writer, which she had been waiting for so long, was finally coming out. The story promised to be especially exciting, and Denise began to ponder the romantic meaning of the book's title, The Ice Sword. However, she understood that she had to carry out her father's order if she did not want to listen to long moralizing later. So the girl called Bella and ordered her to immediately prepare traveling clothes. Denise decided to go looking for Derek. Meanwhile, we are transported somewhere deep into the forest. Far from the city, among the mountains, the entrance to a dark, secluded cave was hidden. Dressed and his new apprentice sat next to a crystal-clear underground lake, preparing to begin their training. He told Derek to close his eyes, release the mana, and feel the mana reflect off the surrounding walls. Derek took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and concentrated completely, following all the teacher's instructions precisely. Soon, greenish mana began to spread out from his body, filling the cave and revealing the outlines of the surrounding space before him. The magician explained that this basic exercise corresponded to the first star and was designed to detect nearby threats. Development up to the fourth star made it possible to track the location of targets, see through camouflage, and anticipate enemy actions. The old man added that on the fifth star, the magician could read thoughts and communicate with the souls of the dead. The six-star level pinnacle bestowed the extremely rare ability to see one's own future. Drest confirmed that he possessed this ability, and it was thanks to it that he found Derek, as he needed his help. The interested hero asked directly why he needed such a search. The magician then asked if Derek knew a man named Valerian. He then reminded him that he was the eldest son and heir of the powerful Duplain family. Drest reported that in the near future, Valerian would find himself closely involved with the forbidden art of necromancy. Derek froze, shocked by such a terrible discovery. The mentor then stated that Derek would have to kill Valerian to prevent the coming disaster. Having come to his senses a little, the hero asked why the heir had to take such a heretical path. However, Drest regretfully warned that he could not reveal more details. He explained that the future was fragile, and if all the details were known in advance, the course of fate could change in the most unpredictable ways. However, the old man decided to reveal another important detail he saw in his visions. He revealed that in the current timeline, Derek was destined to die. The Wanderer noticed with curiosity that the boy took the news of his own death surprisingly calmly. Then Derek reasoned that since the mentor had used the word destined, it meant that his death was not absolutely inevitable. At that moment, a slight smile of approval appeared on Drest's face, caused by the student's insight. Drest confirmed this and admitted that he himself did not want to see such a tragic end. He stated that he would do everything possible to change this fate, but to do this, Derek had to become incredibly strong. The old man raised his hand and began to cast a powerful spell that illuminated the entire cave. Streams of glittering mana quickly gathered around his fingers. The magician said with a smile that he would make his student so strong that he would be able to crush any obstacle. The next moment, a giant beam of blue energy pierced the top of the mountain, brightly illuminating the night sky. From the gorge, the mentor and student silently watched the passage that had formed. Derek decided at that moment to rewrite his own future. Soon morning came to the city. An elegant carriage drove slowly along the streets, attracting the attention of passers-by. Soon the horses stopped near one of the buildings. Denise, with the help of the maid Bella, got out of the carriage. Her elegant white and blue dress immediately attracted the attention of residents and workers. The girl told the coachman that she would continue on foot, allowing him to rest a little. As she and Bella walked down the street, Denise noticed that people around her continued to stare in her direction. Intrigued, she asked the maid why everyone was looking at her like that. Bella replied that she herself did not understand the reason. Then Denise, with a smug smile, decided that she understood everything. She stated that all this was explained solely by her beauty. However, Bella only looked tiredly at her mistress. She recalled that in everyday life she was constantly sitting with books, rarely looked after herself, and looked much less impressive. Denise took these words as a joke, although Bella was completely serious. The maid then suggested that they hurry before another family managed to hire the former mercenary Derek. Denise declared that she would beat all her competitors, but Bella reminded her that Derek had already turned down numerous offers and disappeared. Then Denise thought about it and came to the conclusion that the guy would hardly refuse a lot of money without a good reason. In her opinion, for such a talented magician, the only real value that surpassed wealth was strength. Therefore, the girl decided that Derek had most likely found a rare grimoire or met an outstanding mentor. However, then doubt came over her. The hero voluntarily left the Duplain family estate, although it was there that the conditions were better. Denise realized that Derek had found something, or someone that was far superior to his previous mentors and could help him in his training. The girl decided that she had almost solved this riddle. However, Bella reported that they had finally arrived at their destination. They stopped in front of the Belden's Tier Tavern, the famous headquarters of a mercenary company. As soon as the girls walked inside, Captain Jaden greeted them warmly from behind the counter. However, upon recognizing the new visitors, his expression immediately changed. With a heavy sigh, the man noticed that even a representative of the highest nobility had personally come to look for Derek. He then reported that no one in the tavern knew where the boy had disappeared to, and that 3 different groups had already asked the same question that morning. Then Denise immediately asked if the legendary mage dressed Wolftail had appeared here. The captain was literally stunned by this question. He became nervous and tried to hide the truth. However, the girl only smiled triumphantly, thanking him for the involuntary confirmation of her guess. After that, she told Bella that they now urgently needed to check the crew movement logs. They soon arrived at the Cabbies Guild, located in the city's commercial district. While Bella was looking through a pile of documents, she asked how the owner guessed about the famous magician's visit to the tavern. Denise explained that everything was obvious. Derek voluntarily left the estate, where he could have the support of a 5-star mage. This meant that a person so obsessed with developing magic could only be interested in a 6-star level mentor. Comparing this with the secret information about the arrival of such a magician in the city, she risked making a conclusion. The girl noted, with a satisfied smile, that the tavern owner had completely fallen for her trick. Throwing her hair back proudly, Denise asked if the maid had finally realized how smart she was. However, she only responded with her usual indifferent look, and ironically noted that the hostess too rarely used her mind. The girl just laughed, and then theatrically complained that being so smart was incredibly tiring. She said that sometimes she even wished she were less capable. Bella noted sarcastically that her mistress never listened to other people's advice anyway. The maid then asked worriedly whether they would be able to get Derek at all, since other influential houses were also hunting for him. Denise said she had prepared a foolproof strategy and was going to win the young man over with her feminine charm. In her opinion, an energetic young man could not possibly resist such a beauty as she. Hearing this, Bella was only horrified by her self-confidence. However, the maid quickly cooled her ardor, reminding her that her main rival would be Aiseline. Upon hearing this, Denise immediately panicked and began to beg Bella to tell her honestly whether she was really more beautiful than her rival. Completely ignoring the question, the maid announced that she had finally found the required document. After examining the papers, the girls discovered a week-old entry about the transportation of a hooded man with a suspicious pass. The tracks from the journal led straight to the edge of Ramkal Hill. Or to be more precise, they went to the entrance of the Great Laspa Cave. Meanwhile, deep inside the cave, Drest and Derek sat opposite each other, concentrating on magic. Suddenly, the teacher interrupted his meditation, sensing someone's presence. Drest reported that people from the influential Veltus family had arrived at the cave and were most likely looking for Derek. Then he ordered the disciple to go up to the entrance and meet the guests. Meanwhile, 2 curious girls were already walking straight towards them. Bella, walking through water almost ankle deep, fearfully suggested going back and bringing the family soldiers. However, Denise insisted on continuing on her way, as she wanted to personally receive all the credit for finding the young man. She explained that bringing in troops would inevitably attract unnecessary attention, which could be exploited by rival families. Suddenly, Bella pointed in horror somewhere into the darkness. 2 bright red eyes appeared from the depths of the cave. The maid screamed, deciding that there was a monster in front of them. Denise immediately covered her with her body and ordered her to stay behind. At the same time, the girl was perplexed because, according to available information, there should not be dangerous monsters here. Although she wasn't very skilled in combat magic, she had no other choice. At that moment, they heard human footsteps echoing across the damp floor of the cave. Gathering all her strength, Denise began to chant a spell, and a glowing magic circle appeared around her hand. When the light illuminated the space, the girl finally made out the face of the red-eyed youth. Then she immediately stopped the spell. Derek emerged from the darkness and asked what such an important young lady was doing in such a humble place. Denise looked at him, finally convinced that she had found the legendary former mercenary she had been looking for so long. After this, silence filled the cave as the two girls and the boy looked at each other in silence. A barely noticeable smile of victory appeared on Denise's face. The girl decided that the perfect moment had come to put her seduction plan into action and win Derek over. She walked slowly towards him with a light, graceful gait, the hem of her dress swaying slightly. With a shy look, the noble girl asked if it was really the famous Derek standing before her. The guy just looked at her and confirmed that it was him. Denise feigned great relief upon hearing the answer. Then she bowed politely and admitted with a smile that she had come all this long way just to meet him in person. In addition, the girl added that she had long dreamed of talking to him at least once. However, Derek maintained a completely indifferent expression on his face and did not react to her words in any way. With a touch of irony, the hero noted that the conversation was indeed going quite pleasantly. Bella barely held back her laughter to keep from dying of shame right in the middle of the cave. A streak of irritation even appeared on Denise's forehead, but she tried her best to hold back a forced smile. Not wanting to give up, the girl took a deep breath and decided to change tactics. With a sad look, she admitted that she had seen him in her dreams many times before, after which she praised his reputation as an outstanding magician and mentor. The girl said that she would be infinitely happy to become his student, and behind her, Bella almost fainted from shame. But Derek instantly ruined the whole atmosphere by asking if she was rehearsing a role for a play. The maid had to cough to hide another fit of laughter. While Denise stood there, stunned by such a cold answer, Bella could no longer restrain herself and laughed out loud. Realizing that the image of a timid and defenseless girl had no effect at all, Denise instantly changed her facial expression. She stated that she actually came here for a much more important reason. She explained that after the fight between Aislinn and Alente, she realized that, as a member of the Rose Trio, she had begun to fall behind the others. The girl admitted that she was afraid of staying in one place forever, while everyone around her continued to become stronger. After this, Denise approached, grabbed Derek's hands tightly, and tearfully began to beg him to save her from the fate of a weak sorceress. Taking advantage of such a close distance, she hoped to confuse him, believing that his heart should beat faster. However, the hero removed her hands without the slightest embarrassment. Stunned by such a direct refusal, the girl took a step back and opened her eyes wide. Derek noted indifferently that from what he saw, it didn't seem at all like she was really interested in learning real magic. Mistaking him for a monster, she tried to use the ice spear extremely clumsily and didn't even prepare a stream of her own mana. The hero decided that, despite his large mana reserves, his lack of control and discipline only proved his laziness and unwillingness to train. Bella completely agreed with his words, and even discreetly showed a thumbs up behind her mistress's back. Then Derek took a few more steps forward and decided to give her some advice. He warned that for a man who was truly dedicated to magic, lying was a grave insult. At that moment, Denise was left completely speechless, not knowing what to say to that. Derek didn't know the real reason for her visit, but he wasn't going to accept requests from people who were hiding their intentions. Denise tried to stop him, but Derek only advised him to turn to someone more worthy than a common mercenary. Without turning around, he disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, leaving the girl standing motionless in complete silence. For several minutes, Denise couldn't come to her senses, trying to digest such a categorical refusal. After some time, the sun began to set. On the way back, the girl finally broke the silence and declared that she now fully understood the young man's character. At first she wanted to call him hopeless, but Bella said that he was only an extremely principled person. Denise indignantly complained that she had used expensive cosmetics and the most exquisite perfumes, but still suffered defeat. Bella advised her to calm down and send a letter to the family estate. Taking a few deep breaths and pressing her palm to her chest, Denise gradually calmed down. Afterwards, she admitted that this refusal only fueled her desire to win the fight for Derek. Later that evening, the girls built a fire in the forest to warm their small camp. Bella asked worriedly if her mistress really intended to spend the night in such a situation. Denise replied that she couldn't back out, because as soon as she left, some other noble family would find Derek and lure him away. The maid asked Denise not to overexert herself and said that she was going to go and rest, but the girl stopped her. Denise admitted that she had constantly made Bella suffer because of her selfishness, but said that she wanted to ask for one very important favor. Then she asked to bring the 4th volume of the romance novel tomorrow, the one that told the story of the Duke and the simple girl. Bella just looked at her mistress with complete disappointment, completely tired of her quirks. The next morning, the first rays of the sun illuminated the entrance to the great cave of Laspa. Meanwhile, Derek was still sitting in the depths of the cave, immersed in silence. Suddenly, Denise appeared in the cave, dragging a huge wooden box with great difficulty and groaning with the effort. Having placed him on the ground, the girl announced that she had brought fresh bread, ancient scrolls, a large grimoire, and mana crystals. The hero looked at her and asked what all this was about, but Denise only replied carelessly that it was nothing special. She explained that she decided to provide him with everything he needed so that he could fully concentrate on training. Derek immediately warned that all this kindness did not in any way influence his decision to refuse her request. The girl then stated that this did not bother her at all, because she could learn a lot just by watching his classes. Deep down, Denise was sure that any person would sooner or later fall in love with such a caring assistant. The guy accepted the gifts with gratitude, and the girl decided that he had finally fallen into her trap. However, the hero repeated again that even though he accepted the food, he still had no intention of becoming her mentor. So several more days passed, and the same picture was repeated every day. The girl brought fresh food and new mana crystals every day, but every time she heard the same refusal. One day, she even brought the family chef to cook a truly sumptuous feast in the cave. Later, Denise brought back a huge magical mineral. The guy accepted the gift, but immediately repeated that he would not agree to teach her. The pent-up irritation finally burst out, and the girl hit the wooden support with all her might, splitting it in half. Derek turned out to be a selfish parasite, and she couldn't understand how, after so many gifts, he remained indifferent. At that moment, Bella ran up to the camp with a huge backpack on her back and reported that a serious problem had arisen. She said that the chief butler of the Duplain family was heading straight to the cave with a large retinue. Panicked, Denise ordered them to hide in the bushes and leave the tent in place so that everyone would mistake it for the mercenaries' camp. Soon footsteps were heard along the forest path. The butler of the Duplain family approached the cave, accompanied by maids and armed soldiers. Watching them from her hiding place, Denise was surprised to think that such a procession looked more like a march to war. Soon the butler and the head maid presented Derek with an official proposal. After reading the letter inviting him to become Aislin's mentor, the boy remarked that he considered such an honor to be quite significant. Denise, however, watched tensely from behind the rocks. She almost growled in fear of losing her target, and Bella tried her best to make her mistress be quieter. Pleased with the young man's reaction, the butler suggested that he immediately pack his things and leave with his retinue. However, to his surprise, Derek refused. Denise was at a loss when she heard this answer. Then the hero explained that he would only agree after completing his own training, but he himself did not know when this would happen. But the butler did not give up and asked if he would change his decision if the family increased the reward. Derek apologized and explained that at his current level of power, he couldn't teach Aislinn much. However, he categorically refused to teach anyone magic in a half-hearted manner. At that moment, Denise was finally convinced that the guy turned out to be an even more worthy person than she had assumed. Meanwhile, the story moved to the luxurious estate of the Duplain family. Aislinn smiled broadly when she learned that Derek's location had finally been found. One of the maids reported that the head butler had personally gone to see him the previous evening. Then Aislinn ordered the fastest soldiers to be prepared for departure immediately, ignoring the maid's words about the danger. The girl stated that since it was a matter of meeting her future mentor, she was obliged to go and get him personally. Meanwhile, night fell on the forest. Near the entrance to the cave, Bella and Denise sat by a crackling fire, wrapped in a warm blanket. Denise looked completely depressed, pouting her lips resentfully and closing her eyes tightly, trying to drive away the heavy thoughts. Finally, the girl quietly said that in the morning, they would pack their things and return home. Bella noticed that for such a smart lady, she gave in too quickly. However, the girl only looked at the maid with a displeased look. After this, she asked if she really thought she was stupid, but the maid began to nervously deny it. Denise then admitted that she had always gotten what she wanted in the past if she was stubborn enough. However, this time she did not feel the slightest desire to continue the fight. She was exhausted and no longer had the strength to move forward. Bella noticed that the young mercenary was not the kind of person who could be bribed with wealth, gifts, or influence. In her opinion, he was guided by far more important and noble principles than material gain. Denise listened to these words in silence and thought. She remembered Derek saying he didn't want to teach magic until he was prepared enough. Then the girl remembered how Elente had given it her all during the fight, unleashing all her strength. She also remembered the determined face of Aislinn as she confronted her. Reflecting on all this dedication, Denise looked down and asked herself why things had turned out the way they had. She wondered why everyone around her acted with such sincerity and passion. Meanwhile, deep inside the dark cave, the training never stopped. Suddenly, several stones rose into the air on their own. Derek was completely focused on meditation, enveloped in a thick blue magical aura. Suddenly he opened his eyes, noticing a strange noise at the entrance. Due to the loss of concentration, the spell immediately dissipated, and the stones crashed to the ground with a roar. Soon, a familiar silhouette slowly approached him. It was Denise, and she apologized sincerely for interrupting the training. Coming closer, the girl politely asked if she could sit down next to him. The guy noticed that she looked very different today, and she asked if it was because she spoke more casually. Derek replied that the changes were most noticeable in her eyes. Denise then apologized for causing him inconvenience all these days, and announced that she had decided to stop trying to get his consent. The hero thanked her for all the supplies she brought and wished her to find a good magic teacher. The girl chuckled quietly, and sadly admitted that she actually hated studying magic with all her heart. These words surprised Derek, and he looked at her carefully, and Denise admitted that her whole life consisted of nothing but politics and pretense. Moreover, she tried to hire him only because he had become famous, but he turned out to be too principled. Therefore, believing that sooner or later he would still accept Aiselin's proposal, she decided to give up her attempts. After a short silence, the guy asked why she hated magic so much. Denise began to explain that at first she even liked to do magic, but then she decided to tell the real reason. She recalled her childhood and admitted that magic was just a way for her to get what she wanted, the admiration of others. The girl studied diligently day and night, while everyone called her a genius. However, one day she wondered why she had put in so much effort and what was the point of devoting her entire life to books on magic. Denise sighed heavily and said that she had simply decided to give up then, and that was the truth. Derek noted that every person eventually got tired of empty praise. Then the girl asked if he had listened carefully to her story, because she was sure that she had just been talking to herself. The hero just closed his eyes and wished her a happy return home. Standing up, Denise sighed quietly and admitted that she had been a little jealous of him. She explained that she felt envious of people who, like him, never doubted the value of daily effort. She was sure that one day he would become a great magician. Derek just silently watched the girl go, thinking over everything he had heard. As she was leaving, Denise asked him to at least say hello to her if their paths ever crossed again. The next morning, the bright sun illuminated the lands of the duchy. Meanwhile, Aiselin hurried through the forest at the head of her squad. From the top of the hill, Denise and Bella saw their rivals heading towards the cave, after which they continued on their way home. Denise looked back sadly for the last time. A moment later, she and the maid set off further. A little later, they finally reached their home, the estate of the Grand Duchy of Veltus. While Bella was brushing her hair in the bedroom, Denise was surprised to learn that Aiselin had also been rejected by the young mercenary. The girl immediately wondered if Derek had declined the invitation simply because his training had not yet ended. Realizing that this kind of refusal was very different from the usual, Bella advised her hostess to stop worrying about it. Denise wondered if the hero thought he was the only person in the world who could actually use magic. At that moment, the butler announced that a special guest had arrived for dinner and wished to meet her. Intrigued, Denise headed straight to the main dining room. The girl carefully peered inside through a small crack and respectfully greeted her father. However, the very next moment her eyes widened in amazement when she saw who exactly was sitting at the table. It was none other than Derek, enjoying a fine piece of roast meat. Duke Veltus sat at the head of the table, and the hero dined next to him. Denise and Bella stared forward, completely shocked and unable to understand how this could have happened. The story then returned to the events of the previous evening at the dark cave. Deep inside the cave, Derek sat enveloped in a powerful flow of blue mana. He kept his eyes closed and maintained a deadly serious expression, completely ignoring his fatigue. The boy thought about the correct alignment of magical energy and forced himself to hold out just a little longer. He then concentrated, gradually gathering all the surrounding mana flow into one dense point of pure energy. Beads of sweat ran down his face from the colossal effort this complex technique required. Finally, reaching the limit of his concentration, the hero suddenly opened his eyes. He then slammed his palm hard onto the cave floor, releasing a magical shockwave. Explosions of blue energy erupted in all directions at once. Stalagmite fragments began to fly in all directions, and the walls of the cave itself began to shake. As the dust gradually settled, Derek sank heavily to his knees, completely exhausted. The guy was having a hard time catching his breath, trying to regain at least some of his strength after the incredible stress. Suddenly, Drest's voice came from the depths of the cave, warning that at this rate the student would lose consciousness from exhaustion. He noted that it would be extremely disappointing to die of exhaustion immediately after having mastered such a complex technique. After this, the old man seriously stated that it was time to leave this cave. Hearing his mentor's words, Derek realized that he had just successfully mastered the 3-star spell, Tectonic Shift. Later, the teacher and student fried fresh fish over a fire near the camp. Drest reported that for now, he had nothing more to teach his student in this place. As he had said before, mediocre talent would not be enough to survive all the trials that awaited him in the future. The old man advised him to think for himself how far he really wanted to go on his path. Derek then curiously asked where the mentor was going to go, seeing that he suddenly stood up. Drest replied that he wanted to take a short walk in the forest and get some fresh air. After that, he slowly disappeared among the dark trees. A moment later, the old magician's voice came again from the forest thicket. Looking over his shoulder, he warned the student to be extremely careful around Kohela. Immediately after this, the mentor completely disappeared into the darkness of the night forest. Left alone near the fire, Derek sat thoughtfully with fried fish in his hands. He replayed his teacher's cryptic warning over and over in his mind. The next day, events moved to the luxurious estate of the Grand Duke Veltus. During dinner, the head of the family proudly praised his daughter for having managed to bring Derek. Denise accepted the praise politely and modestly replied that she had only done what she thought was necessary. The Duke then turned to Derek and asked why he had refused the Duplain family, assuring him that he was ready to provide him with any support. The hero replied that he didn't need anything, and he decided to accept the offer solely because of the girl's attitude. The Duke proudly agreed and joyfully declared that no one in the world could refuse to teach such an exemplary young lady. Then he began to enthusiastically recall an old incident when Denise forgave one of the maids. Unable to bear this sycophancy, the girl hastened to interrupt her father's story. She offered, with a gentle smile, to first discuss with Derek alone all the details of their future magical studies. The Grand Duke's butler took the hint and left the dining room, leaving only Denise and Derek at the table. As soon as her father left, Denise asked if the guy had decided to play a joke on her by showing up there. She then irritably demanded an explanation, reminding him that he had already refused her offer and they had closed the matter. Derek explained that he agreed because he felt grateful for the tremendous help she had given him previously. Denise haughtily retorted that all of this was just a political calculation and that she herself had no interest in magic at all. Then the hero openly admitted that it was unpleasant for him to hear such words. He then reproached Denise for condemning and hating magic without even trying to understand what it really was. The girl fell silent for a moment after such a straightforward remark. Closing her eyes, she acknowledged that such words could indeed hurt a man like him. However, the girl stubbornly repeated that she still couldn't stand magic. Derek felt a deep sense of indignation at the hatred with which she spoke of art that he considered beautiful. A frightening aura began to spread around him, and he warned that he was not going to tolerate such treatment. Feeling the monstrous magical pressure, Denise turned suddenly pale. The girl regretted that she had decided to irritate a man who possessed such terrifying power. Meanwhile, events moved to the noble district of Ebelstein. In the living room, by the window, Aislinn sat, lost in thought about recent events. She was very sad that Derek refused to become her teacher. She remembered again her meeting with Derek in the cave. Then the hero directly stated that she had nothing left to learn under his guidance. Her magical foundation was already so strong that she would have been better served by a mentor who adhered to the classical principles of teaching. After this, the guy bowed politely and officially rejected her offer. Aislinn remembered how she froze in surprise, unable to utter a word. That refusal greatly shocked the girl and threw her off balance for a long time. Returning her thoughts to the present, she realized that Derek's decision had already been final. With a heavy sigh, the girl pressed her palm against the cold window glass. She reflected on the fact that all her life she had considered traditional rules to be the only correct path. Now she realized that she had actually just lived, never having had real freedom of choice. Her thoughts were interrupted by a cautious knock on the door. Having received permission to enter, the maid reported that a very important letter had just arrived from the family's main residence. She then added that the departure ceremony for young Master Valerian was to take place the following week. This news noticeably surprised Aislinn, and the girl immediately decided to prepare a special gift for him in honor of his first trip. She was planning to head to the shopping district and pick up something useful, knowing that the White Zone required preparation. However, as soon as the girl took the first step, one of the legs of the wooden chair suddenly cracked. The chair fell to the floor with a crash, and at that moment a sense of foreboding hung in the room. Meanwhile, night fell on Denise's mansion in the noble district of Ebelstein. The girl thought that her mentor had lost his mind if he looked at her so aggressively just because of a conversation about magic. She grumbled with displeasure, not understanding why he tried to force his passion on others just because he himself loved magic. Bella noted that if her mistress really thought so, then she herself should stop forcing her to read her favorite romance novels. Denise immediately jumped up and began to object in almost the same words that Derek had spoken just recently. Then the maid noticed with a smile that the girl was now behaving exactly like him. Denise then wondered how difficult it would be to study with a mentor who possessed such outstanding talent. Not paying much attention to her complaints, Bella just smiled warmly and advised her mistress to finally go to bed. Denise realized that if she couldn't become stronger with the best mentor, she would look like the most hopeless person in the world. The girl then covered herself completely with a blanket and said that her only dream was to lie at home and read romance novels. As she left the room, Bella warned with a smile that if Derek were suddenly fired, there would be no money left to buy new books. After she left, the bedroom fell silent. Suddenly, Denise began to toss and turn irritably, finally realizing that now she would no longer be able to escape her new exhausting life. A few seconds later, she poked only the top of her head out from under the blanket and stared tiredly into space. The girl sighed heavily at the thought of the inevitable start of a new training routine. The story now flashes back briefly to Derek's conversation with Drest around a forest fire. The mentor then advised the hero to maintain good relations with all three great noble families of Ebelstein. However, the old man emphasized that the hero should under no circumstances swear allegiance to any one side. Drest advised him to use the rivalry between the three great houses to his advantage and maintain competition between them. This was the only way Derek could keep them interested and truly protect himself in the future. Meanwhile, the story returned to the present, to the Veltus family estate. Unaware of anything, Denise slept soundly in her bed, snoring loudly. Suddenly, someone started banging a wooden spoon on a metal frying pan with all their might. A deafening roar made the girl jump up and scream in fear. Derek stood in front of her, and an indignant Denise asked if he had completely lost his mind. The guy replied that it was already morning, and he had to make a fuss because she didn't want to wake up on her own. The girl quickly covered herself with a pillow and declared that he should not have burst into the girl's bedroom while she was in her pajamas. However, Derek replied that he had clearly seen her pajamas, after which he told her to get dressed and come out in 5 minutes. Then the hero immediately turned around, left the room, and slammed the door behind him. Denise remained sitting on the bed, flushed with rage at his incredible impudence. A few minutes later, the girl ran out into the garden. She declared that even rudeness should have a limit, especially since it was a day off. Without looking up from his book, Derek agreed that Saturdays and Sundays really weren't the time to overload himself with studies. However, the hero explained that rest and a complete disregard for basic discipline were completely different things. He then added that trio member Rose should have maintained at least a modicum of civility even on weekends. Denise stated that she was the one who set the rules, and therefore, as an employee, he was obliged to obey her orders. In response, Derek silently took out a piece of paper and showed it right in front of her face. He reported that it was an official contract, personally signed by the Grand Duke. The boy then emphasized that his real employer was the head of the family, who gave him complete authority over her education. The girl leaned closer and read with horror the terms of the contract drawn up by her own father. While Denise was in despair, realizing that she knew nothing about this agreement, Derek began to list the schedule for the day. It included hidden tests, elemental magic training, and heavy physical exercise. An indignant Denise reminded him that just a minute ago, he himself had said that no one should study too hard on weekends. Then the guy paused briefly and confirmed that he had not taken back his words. However, Derek added that all of the above was just basic training. Hearing this, the girl almost burst into tears, finally realizing that she was in the hands of a real psychopath. Meanwhile, Bella was hanging freshly washed white sheets in the garden. Suddenly, she heard heavy breathing and the sound of rapidly approaching footsteps. Turning around, the maid saw her mistress, completely exhausted, running after the new mentor. Almost collapsing from exhaustion, Denise reached out to Bella, begging her to save her. However, instead of helping, the maid only joyfully clenched her fists and began to sincerely encourage the girl. She only groaned pitifully, realizing that even her faithful assistant had gone over to the side of this ruthless guy. Denise spent the next hours studying theoretical books. Then, during practice, Derek used a wooden stick to correct every incorrect movement of her hands. Even late in the evening, when the full moon had already risen over the estate, they continued to run around the garden without stopping. The whole day passed in this way, and the exhausting classes ended only late at night. An exhausted Denise grumbled that she would rather die of fatigue than let that damned mercenary go to hell himself. Bella remarked that she would be the one to get there first, and Denise complained that the maid had changed since meeting Derek. Denise burst into tears in the bathtub and accused Bella of becoming as heartless as her new teacher. In response, the maid said that without sweat and tears, a person will never become stronger, and Denise was even frightened by these words. She admitted that Derek had been too prudent in contracting directly with her father. Denise immediately had an idea. She suggested lying that the guy was useless and asked the maid to confirm her words. However, Bella only smiled and refused to participate in such a deception. The girl immediately gave her a look full of disappointment. Then Bella explained that such a plan would never have worked anyway. It was Denise who brought Derek to the estate, and any other family would have gladly hired such a mentor. The girl just sighed heavily, realizing that Bella was absolutely right. Besides, she knew very well that her father could give in on many issues, but would never allow the honor of his family to be tarnished. The next day, Denise lazily shuffled along the long corridors of the estate in her slippers. The girl happily told Bella that she finally had free time to read her favorite novels. However, turning the corner, she unexpectedly collided with Derek, and the girl almost fell backwards from fright. She hesitantly asked him what else he was doing there, and begged him not to arrange any unexpected activities today. The guy asked, puzzled, what she was talking about, and noted that excessive loads were not beneficial. The mentor simply wanted to tell her the training schedule for the morning, but the girl covered her ears and began loudly calling for security. The next morning, the first rays of the sun illuminated the facade of the estate. Denise lay motionless on the bed with a lifeless look, feeling pain throughout her entire body after yesterday's training. She said that it seemed to her as if 3 years had already passed, but Bella corrected her hostess, reminding her that only 3 days had passed. Then the maid reassured the girl, informing her that today she had to attend a meeting at Rose's salon, so training was cancelled. Hearing this, Denise jumped out of bed and rushed to change her clothes, fearing that the mentor would appear here again. However, having completely pulled herself together, the girl ran out into the corridor and immediately ran into Derek again. The guy began to calmly list the plan of theoretical and physical classes for the day. Not even wanting to listen to him, Denise rushed past him, loudly declaring that she had no interest in any training. To her surprise, the hero agreed. He said that he understood the importance of Rose's salon, so he was going to wait for her return. Then the guy politely asked to take his time and enjoy the event. This unexpected compliance immediately alerted Denise. She suspected that he had already guessed that she was only going to use the meeting as an excuse to avoid training. However, deciding not to bother her head, Denise ran away, celebrating that even boring social events could sometimes be useful. Derek, however, silently watched her go with a serious look. Later, in the evening, the Veltas family's carriage returned along the road under an orange sky. Inside the carriage, Denise lay exhausted on the seat with a completely exhausted face. Bella noted with a smile that at the meeting the hostess had looked full of energy, but now it seemed as if she was being taken to execution. The girl said that a real nightmare awaited her, because upon his return this heartless demon would immediately resume training. Suddenly a bold idea came to her mind. Under Bella's surprised gaze, Denise concentrated a small clot of blue mana in her palm. She said she was going to flip the carriage over on purpose to fake an accident and get out of her classes. She then asked the maid if she was a real genius, but Bella looked at her with obvious disapproval. But the girl didn't have time to carry out her plan. Bella grabbed her hands, forcing her to cancel the magic. Meanwhile, near the estate, Derek was talking with an elderly gardener. As Denise stepped out of the carriage, she was amazed to see her stern mentor talking cheerfully with old Phoebus. The girl did not understand at all where such an unexpected change in his behavior came from. However, as soon as the young man noticed his student, the smile instantly disappeared from his face and he became serious again. After this, Derek, without further ado, ordered her to immediately go to the office and begin her evening theory classes. Denise just looked at him silently with an expression of complete defeat. Later, sitting in the classroom, the girl noticed that on this day, for some reason, the mentor no longer followed her every step. Approaching the large window, Denise looked out into the garden and unexpectedly saw an unusual picture. To her surprise, Derek was practicing swordplay with one of the estate's guards. A little later, she looked through the kitchen door and was even more surprised to see the guy animatedly discussing cooking with the chef. Then the girl noticed how the mentor was showing the elderly servant simple magical tricks with plants. Finally intrigued, Denise thought that all this sudden friendliness looked extremely suspicious. Denise admitted that she was alarmed by the fact that Derek had managed to talk to almost all the servants in the house. She then asked Bella not to fall for any of her mentor's tricks and to always stay on her side. The maid smiled warmly and assured the girl that she had nothing to worry about, as she valued her company most of all. However, the very next day, Bella was walking in the garden next to Derek, helping him carry a basket of clean laundry. From the living room window, Denise watched the scene with an expression of complete disbelief. Bella, blushing slightly, literally melted from the charm of her new mentor. Realizing that she had lost her only ally in the house, Denise cried out the maid's name with tears in her eyes. In the end, she decided to deal with what was happening personally. Denise walked out into the yard, approached Derek and declared that the estate belonged to her and all the staff were under her management. Denise demanded that Derek stop his strange plans and focus solely on teaching magic. The guy admitted that he had indeed tried to get close to the servants, but assured that he had no bad intentions. When asked about the reason for this behavior, the girl admitted that the whole situation made her anxious. Derek then explained that he wanted to know the real Denise, not just the noble lady rumored to be her. According to the hero, the training was not limited to the transfer of theoretical knowledge. The better the mentor understood the student's character, habits, and lifestyle, the more effectively he could tailor the lessons to him. Blushing slightly, Denise awkwardly adjusted her hair and asked shyly if the servants had ever said she was more beautiful than Aislinn or Elente. Derek replied that everyone was saying that she got bored easily and lacked real motivation in her life. But when things got serious, she took control of the situation and hid her concern for the staff behind her outward coldness. The hero remembered that the elderly gardener had said with a smile that Denise reminded him very much of his own stubborn daughter. The chef said that the hostess often complained about the seasonings, but the very next day, she bought the best spices for the kitchen herself. One of the guards recalled with gratitude how Denise noticed his illness and ordered expensive medications to be delivered. Bella also spoke warmly of her mistress, saying that during her illness the girl spent the whole night by her side, caring for her. Realizing that all her good deeds had suddenly been revealed, Denise blushed deeply with embarrassment. She looked away and tried to justify herself, saying that they were speaking out of politeness and that she was only fulfilling her duty as a lady. Meanwhile, Derek continued the conversation and said that he had learned another very interesting thing about her. He said that he had heard about her talent as a writer. The girl immediately panicked, laughed nervously, and began to deny everything, insisting that she knew nothing about any writing. However, the guy admitted that he knew about her book called The Arrogant Sir Robane, which he read with interest. Denise almost died of shame, trying to understand who else knew her main secret and why he decided to read this novel. Meanwhile, Derek noted that he was moved by Tracy's story, although he considered the protagonist's behavior a little exaggerated. He then even pointed out the entire 7 pages Denise had devoted to detailing the character's masculinity. Unable to bear such shame, the girl covered her face with her hands and ran as fast as she could out of the garden. The hero silently watched her go, thinking that he had to get to know his student well in order to teach her magic properly. Then a barely noticeable smile appeared on his face. The boy understood that breaking down internal barriers was necessary to unlock the potential that Denise had hidden for so long. The next morning there was a knock on the girl's bedroom door. Derek walked into her room, said good morning, and caught Denise off guard while Bella was brushing her hair. He then asked her if she had written a new chapter of her novel during the night and advised her to go to bed early. Seeing her confused reaction, the guy clarified that he was talking about the book they had discussed the day before. After that, he began to remember the famous scene on the balcony from the 9th volume. Fearing that Bella would overhear the conversation, Denise grabbed her mentor's hand and declared that they needed to start training immediately. Derek allowed himself to be led away without resistance, noting with satisfaction that the plan had worked perfectly. Soon evening arrived, ending another intense day of training. Elente was drinking tea with Denise and noticed that about 10 days had passed since the new mentor had arrived. The girl then asked with a smile whether her friend had managed to get used to the new routine. Denise said that if hell really existed, it probably looked exactly like her workouts. Elente noticed that even the shaking of the cup made it clear how harsh the classes had become. Putting her cup down on the saucer, Elente asked her friend if she had heard the latest news from the noble quarter. Completely exhausted, Denise asked what news exactly they were talking about. Elente announced that Diela's debut ball would soon be taking place and that she and her sister would be attending the next meeting of the Rose Salon for the first time. This news made Denise think. She remembered that Diela had always been considered lazy and untalented. As night fell, the story moved to the luxurious castle of the Grand Duchy of Duplain. Diela sat on the floor of the huge library and asked with obvious displeasure why she had visited Rose's salon at all. The butler explained that attending the meeting was a mandatory part of preparation for her debut in high society. After a short silence, the girl agreed to accept the invitation and decided to try to attend the event. At the same time, she admitted that in any case, she really wanted to see one person there again, meaning Denise. Sometime later, the action moved to the mansion's garden, where Iselin and Diela were drinking tea. Diela didn't understand why she even wanted to join Rose's salon. Other than Iselin and Lady Ellen, the other members were of no value. But Iselin explained to her that Diela was mistaken, since among the participants there were many not only educated, but also charming people. The girl replied that, although she was interested in learning about the world outside the mansion, high society did not attract her. In her opinion, at such meetings people only spoke beautiful words, almost never expressing sincere feelings. Iselin was surprised by this look and explained that it all depended on the point of view. For both of them, the path to high society was natural because they were born into the Duplain family and never had to struggle. However, for people from less influential families, such an opportunity could be life-changing. Therefore, according to the girl, one should not take one's privileges for granted. Instead, one had to appreciate what one had received and try to live up to one's position. Iselin added that participating in the salon was a great opportunity to broaden her horizons and make useful connections. After listening to her carefully, Diela said that since her sister considered it important, she would take the idea more seriously. However, the girl was planning to visit the salon at least once anyway. Then Diela asked if she would now have her own mansion in Ebelstein, since her basic education had been completed. Iselin confirmed this and added that the younger sister would be able to hire servants on her own. Hearing this, Diela perked up and immediately asked if she could invite that same mercenary as a personal mentor. Iselin noticed that she immediately guessed what her sister was getting at. However, she recalled that Derek had already worked as a magic tutor for Lady Denise. Diela said that she knew this perfectly well. She explained that it would be impolite to take a mentor away from another house, but she was only thinking about such a possibility. After these words, Iselin completely lost the point of this conversation. Meanwhile, the action moved to the noble district of Ebelstein, to Denise's mansion. At that moment, her next training session was taking place there. After observing the student for a while, Derek praised her. He noted that she had made significant progress and should now be able to spot enemies outside her field of vision. Then the hero suddenly fell silent. Then Derek exhaled carefully, preparing to ask the important question. He asked with an ominous expression if she had begun to find magic truly fascinating. Denise froze for a moment in surprise. Bella, who was sitting nearby, said that it was all incredibly fun. Meanwhile, Derek asked if the girl had felt changes in the flow of mana and noticed fluctuations in magical energy. Then the mentor declared that it was impossible not to love magic because it allowed one to develop one's innate mana, revealing its limits. Denise just stared at her mentor in shock, thinking only about how scary he looked right now. But Bella enthusiastically declared that it all sounded really interesting. Denise immediately turned to the maid and indignantly asked what exactly in what was happening could seem funny. Bella replied that watching from the sidelines was always much more enjoyable than doing it herself. This answer only angered her mistress even more. Then Derek stood up and announced that he had figured out the cause of the problem. In his opinion, Denise simply had not yet discovered the true joy of magic. The girl looked at him incredulously and asked how she could even enjoy herself while in such a state. After a short silence, the hero admitted that he had made a mistake. Hearing this, Denise immediately decided that the mentor was finally going to reduce the workload, and her face lit up with hope. However, the very next second the guy declared that the mistake was not the excessive difficulty of the exercises, but rather their insufficient intensity. Denise turned pale the moment she heard Derek's words. In horror, she rushed towards him, grabbed his legs, and began to beg him to stop. The girl assured him that the training was incredibly exciting, and she herself had never had so much fun before. However, Derek said there was no time to waste, so he would prepare an even more intense training program for her. Hearing this, Denise burst into tears, finally realizing that her entire performance had been useless. Meanwhile, the story moved to another place, namely to Rose's salon. The atmosphere there was lively. The girls were discussing among themselves various handsome aristocrats. The other girls discussed various paintings and other high art. However, Diella stood out among them all. She looked irritated, watching the girls, and only sighed heavily. She complained to herself that she couldn't stand watching everyone around her pretend to be noble ladies. The whole meeting seemed unbearably boring to her, which was easily read on her face. At that moment, the one for whom Diella had come here in the first place suddenly came into her field of vision. Denise stood nearby and talked with other girls. However, Diella did not look at all pleased to meet her. She sighed wearily. All of this was a burden to her. However, she still decided to approach the white-haired girl. Coming closer, Diella clarified whether it was indeed Lady Denise of House Veltis who stood before her. After receiving confirmation, she introduced herself as Diella of House Duplain. For a while the girl stood there, confused, like the other ladies she was talking to. However, Denise then politely replied that she was glad to meet him and introduced herself. But her interlocutor immediately said that she knew perfectly well who was in front of her, and therefore decided to get straight to the point. Despite the harsh tone, Denise maintained her composure, although she noted that this girl had a difficult character. After this, Diella immediately asked if Derek was currently in her service. The girl was momentarily surprised why she was asking a question whose answer was already obvious, but she honestly confirmed it. As soon as Denise said this, Diella's face noticeably darkened and she clicked her tongue in irritation. Denise noticed this immediately and became indignant, even wondering whether she should kick this impudent woman. However, then Diella suddenly noticed that everything seemed to be going quite well for Denise. She asked her again in bewilderment, not understanding how, after all of Derek's bullying, she could say that everything was fine with her. But then another thought occurred to her. If Diella reacted that way simply because Derek had trained her, then perhaps it wasn't arrogance that was the issue, but jealousy. Realizing this, Denise instantly changed her opinion of her. The girl she had just scolded suddenly turned into a real little angel in her eyes. She was touched by the fact that this little angel wanted to take Derek away from her. Then Diella said that Denise didn't seem to understand why she should be nervous. Derek always did what he thought was right and could change his mind at any time without worrying about the consequences. However, Denise replied that it was quite natural. She said with a smile that in the end, the most important thing was Derek's own choice. Diella watched her reaction in silence. She was openly provoking Denise, but she remained completely calm. She then asked again if Denise had understood what would happen if House Duplain ever offered him better terms. However, Denise replied that that would be wonderful too, as training Lady Diella for Derek might be even better. Diella didn't know what to answer. She was surprised that no attempt to unbalance her brought results. After a short pause, Denise added softly that she could have arranged a meeting with Derek if she had wanted. At that moment, Diella realized that there was no point in continuing the conversation, so she turned around in displeasure and left. Denise couldn't understand how this girl managed to trust Derek so much, but she decided to find out the truth. Later, our story moves to Denise's mansion. While resting in her room, the girl thought about today's events. She thought that she and the little angel were actually striving for the same goal, to transfer Derek to the Duplain house. She then asked Diella to be sure to read her letter, being confident that after that, she would no longer be able to refuse. Denise wrote that she believed they were both pursuing the same goal. She admitted that she wanted to get rid of Derek, while Lady Dila, on the contrary, wanted to get him. Therefore, the girl proposed to hold a magical duel, putting Derek himself on the line. In return, Dila could put whatever she wanted. In this case, Denise will deliberately lose the fight, thanks to which their house will only have to officially hand over Derek to the Duplain family. Denise had no doubt that after reading the letter, Diella would no longer be able to refuse such an offer. After this, the story moved to the residence of the Duplain house, where the head of the family was waiting for the return of his sons. Looking at his eldest son, he asked how the expedition to the White Zone had gone. He respectfully replied that the cleanup was still ongoing and would take a lot of time, but it was not without results. Upon hearing this, Raymond immediately became interested and asked to tell him in more detail what results they had managed to achieve. Then Rig reported that while clearing one of the White Zone's labyrinths, he discovered a magical weapon. The Duke noted that an object found in such a place must have been very valuable, and added that he would like to examine it personally. However, Valerian immediately clarified that it was a large staff, which apparently was intended for necromancy magic. Hearing this, the head of the family instantly fell silent, his calm expression changing to a worried one. Meanwhile, it was already morning outside. Denise was still fast asleep, but even in her sleep she continued to go through another grueling workout. Utterly exhausted, she repeated that she had already reached her limit and could no longer continue. Suddenly, the girl woke up with a start and screamed in panic, demanding that this crazy bastard finally stop. Quite quickly, Denise realized that she had said all this out loud, and very loudly. For a few seconds she sat motionless on the bed, breathing heavily and trying to calm down. Realizing it was just a dream, Denise looked around in confusion. She thought that she had already dreamed about the training so realistically, as if it were happening in reality. After leaving the room, the girl called Bella and asked why she hadn't woken her up. The maid replied that she had decided to let her mistress sleep. Hearing this, Denise worriedly asked if Derek would torment her even more because she overslept. However, Bella calmed the lady down, explaining that the hero took the day off because the commander of the mercenary squad was wounded. At the same time, she expressed hope that nothing serious had happened, having barely heard these words. Denise turned silently and headed back to the bedroom, but Bella called out to her and reminded her that she needed to have breakfast first. However, the girl replied that she would do without breakfast today, after which she entered the room and slammed the door. As soon as the door closed, she could no longer contain her joy. Denise began jumping around the room, rejoicing that she was finally free, even if only for one day. She stretched out on the bed, feeling a long-forgotten sense of freedom. The girl thought that she had not felt so calm for a very long time, enjoying the cool air and the cozy room. Then Denise decided to read a novel, remembering that there was a whole stack of unread books waiting for her in the office. However, she almost immediately abandoned this idea. She came up with the idea of devoting this time to writing her own novel. Meanwhile, the action moved to the shopping district of Ebelstein, to the Belden's Tier Tavern. Derek walked inside and looked around carefully. To his surprise, it was empty inside. Neither Jaden nor Pellin were visible behind the bar. Then Derek carefully moved inside and headed towards the cellar. As soon as he opened the door, he immediately heard the voices of his comrades. Jaden and Pellin were already waiting for him inside. Jaden's amputated arm was heavily bandaged, the injury far more serious than a normal wound. Noticing the protagonist, Jaden greeted him with a slight smile, and Pellin also greeted him with tears in her eyes. Derek looked at his friend bitterly, not knowing what to say to him. Jaden himself looked at his injured hand and noted with a grin that, even during the war, he had not received such serious injuries. Derek sat down next to him and countered that no matter how dangerous the White Zone labyrinth was, it wasn't enough to overcome him. Jaden agreed and admitted that he never expected to encounter a sandworm. Hearing this, the boy asked again whether they were really talking about a sandworm. Jaden explained that he had seen similar creatures during the war, but the sudden attack had caught him off guard. Despite this, he sacrificed his hand, but managed to cut the monster's neck, noting that he considered such an exchange quite profitable. Jaden added that after the Duplain family began exploring the White Zone, other houses began sending expeditions there as well. In his opinion, they all expected to find something truly valuable. After a short pause, Jaden became unusually serious and warned Derek not to go into the White Zone without an army. Otherwise, the hero would have faced only a senseless death, and he himself did not want Derek to die at all. Meanwhile, Denise was sitting in her room, and by this time it was already evening. Putting her books aside, the girl realized that even though she had spent the whole day without training, she had not felt any pleasure. Denise leaned back in her chair wearily and noted that she had been having a hard time concentrating on her writing. Then she wondered what she usually did during the day. Then, almost automatically, she stretched out her hand in front of her. The girl released her mana and suddenly caught herself thinking that lately, her life had consisted exclusively of magic. Denise suddenly realized how much the daily training and magic had become a part of her everyday life.